So good afternoon, everyone. If I could ask you to take your seats slowly as we get started. So I'd like to welcome you to the first Nor-Shipping LNG Conference. I think it's a testament to what LNG is and will become that we're doing this for the first time at this prestigious conference. We have a very busy session today, so I won't waste too much of your time doing intros. We'll start us off with a keynote. It will be Justin Murphy, SVP of Corporate Strategy at ADNOC. Justin, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. And just to the organizers, I appreciate very much the opportunity to join you here today. And again, to congratulate the organizers again. The venue, or Oslo itself, I was here 2 years ago. The weather was slightly warmer, but I still think there's a buzz of excitement being in shipping in Oslo in particular. Every corner you walk around, I see people that I worked with 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. Shipping clearly plays a pivotal role in your day-to-day lives as well as just work. So I appreciate that. It's fun to come here. I live in Abu Dhabi, working for ADNOC Logistics and Services. We're a listed company. We were listed on the ADX, Abu Dhabi Exchange, on the 1st of June 2023. And we've enjoyed fairly stellar growth over the last 6 or 7 years. What I've put in here is not a typo. I talked about the futures of LNG shipping, because I'm not going to pretend that I can predict precisely what the future holds. I'm going to give you an example of a few scenarios of how life or the world might unfold, and generally also predicated on my own experience of what's happening in my own company. So also I'll share a little bit of what we're doing, and also what the group, ADNOC Group, our 81% shareholder, is doing, which I feel offers some insight as to the likely way that the LNG shipping market in particular, which is quite different to the dry bulk market, quite different to the crude tanker and product tanker market, how that might offer an insight as to how trade in LNG shipping will develop. So again, here, just to hover briefly, I know over the past several months, and also it's been referenced a lot in meetings this week, probably only equaling alongside sustainability and the use of alternative fuels. The first 4 or 5 months of this year has been quite different for a variety of reasons. The headlines are there. What I would say is, and this will be a theme of the later presentation, is that in spite of all of these events, all of this uncertainty, I think when it comes to LNG shipping, and that's LNG shipping quite specifically, I think the future is pretty well assured. So I know that might sound strange with 50 or 60 steam turbine vessels laying idle, rates dwindling around all-time historic lows. In spite of those facts, the reality is that there is a huge degree of rational, logical reason to be optimistic about the future. And again, just to explain what it is we do, when the topic here is around LNG, but just so you understand from my perspective, leading both strategy, business development, M&A activity, execution, JVs, whatever, I would take a step back from LNG in particular and look at the portfolio of gases. So we're running a gas shipping portfolio along with all of the other segments we cover. And a lot of that also is based on serving ADNOC or ADNOC associated affiliates as well. So here we have ADNOC Gas, which is an affiliate company based in the same complex of a series of buildings that I work in Abu Dhabi. Again, a little known fact, maybe you know ADNOC Gas, maybe you don't know. In its own right, that's just one affiliate company. That would be the 11th largest energy company in the world. That's just one of the many ADNOC companies. So it's a pretty big company in its own right. Separately, we have ADNOC Trading, which is 100% owned by ADNOC Group. Then we have Fertiglobe, a company that was acquired, or 86% of it was acquired by ADNOC last year. That's the world's largest seaborne exporter carrier of ammonia. Wanhua is Wanhua Chemical Group. We have a joint venture with Wanhua, which is a company that comes from Yantai in northern China. We've created more than a $2 billion portfolio of gas-related assets in that JV company, which is headquartered on the ADGM, Abu Dhabi Global Market. Finally, we have ADNOC Group, and then XRG. Many of you have probably not heard of XRG before, but I can suggest that you start following them on LinkedIn. That's already an $80 billion company, and today they've announced that the board of directors has set out a business plan to become the third largest chemicals company in the world, and to become a top 5 integrated global gas company as well. So the reason these things are relevant are because our shipping strategy is built around serving the needs of all of these affiliates. And these are just companies that have a gas element to them. We have a very large, like one of the largest offshore fleets in the world, as well as dry bulk, crude, product tankers as well. But again, just focusing more narrowly on gas, so you can understand how we see the world. These are the customers or clients we're serving. So in addition to the 8 legacy steam turbine vessels that we have, which we hope to convert to FSRUs or FSUs around the world, we have 14 dual-fuel LNG carriers for delivery in Jiangnan in China, Hanwha, Samsung. Those vessels are being built. We also have 4 very large ammonia carriers, which are being built in Jiangnan in China as well. We've become the largest ethane carrier ship owner in the world. That's because there are only 30 vessels in the world and we own 9. But I'm very sure that in some short time we might not be number 1. But we have also 7 very large gas carriers operating in the AW Shipping, the Wanhua joint venture that we have as well. So again, so you'll understand that this background shapes my perspective and also the way that I see the world, and also I think it may offer a model for the way that other companies develop as well. Here, the one reason that all of you working in LNG shipping and the gas segment in general should be optimistic is this. There's a dramatic surge in liquefaction capacity. I know during the end of the or midway through the Biden term, things have slowed down. And then we have a new incumbent president who's promised to drill, baby, drill. So again, and maybe not all of those projects are advanced just yet, but even so, in spite of that, sorry about the graph to the right, the time frame goes year by year by year, then until we get to 25, then we go in 5-year increments, just to show the build-up there. So global LNG export capacity expected to rise by around 40%. That's quite an astonishing growth trajectory, and that needs shipping to support it. Then we have our own Ruwais is a large city with a lot of the second largest petrochemical refining complex in the world, where we're building Ruwais LNG, which will be the world's first entirely green powered. So in spite of the fact we're an energy company, we're using various different forms of energy. So all ADNOC facilities are powered by renewables, nuclear and solar. The entire offshore ecosystem, no more gas turbines, is entirely powered by electrification. And the Ruwais LNG facility, which commences in 2028, will again be entirely powered by green energy. So in spite of the fact there have been delays in the build-up of this liquefaction capacity, the majority of projects are expected to come online by the end of 2026. So again, in spite of all of the turmoil, all of the negative headlines and the news that we've had over the last 4 or 5 months, the uncertainty, if you're in LNG shipping, there's a huge amount of legitimate reason to be optimistic about the future demand for LNG shipping. Again, here, summarizing using slightly different graphs or reference points away from liquefaction capacity to where we see on the left-hand graph, again, the shorter term, we have LNG project delays. Although we have a robust order book, that sounds in some ways a positive, but it's also a negative because a lot of vessels are coming out of the yards, weaker gas prices. So we know, we're not blind, or I'm not blind to the fact that rates at the moment are relatively low or very low. You can also see that this mirrored by, to some extent, by shifts or changes in gas prices. But in the long run, again, with the steam turbine vessels being replaced, which they will be, because in terms of their economic viability, where people have a choice of two-stroke engines, the fact that LNG bunkering, a little bit of a stop-start there, but again, it seems only entirely logical that that industry will develop. Again, there's more dual-fuel LNG vessels enter the market. We have, as well as our LNG carriers, we have dual-fuel LNG, very large crude carriers, and no doubt we'll invest in other vessels which also have the option of using LNG as a form of propulsion. LNG prices are coming down, most logically, not because I have any better insight to you as to how prices are likely to develop. But if the liquefaction capacity is increasing by 40%, those huge volumes are coming out, it seems entirely logical that prices will come down too. So in a way, this is setting the scene for the uncertainty that you've heard about around all business. And again, I can see here that we do have a huge build-up, including in our own fleet. We have vessels that were built in the mid-90s. So this is going to be quickly switching to the audience, a bit of a pop quiz. Who in the audience can guess what the highest price is that we paid for one of our mid-1990s built LNG carriers? Today the price is around $240, $250. What do you think we paid in the early 90s to have those vessels? Would anybody like to guess? There's a prize. Has that changed? Actually, it's quite staggering. We built vessels in Caverna, and we also built vessels in Japan. And at that time, because some of the vessels were denominated in yen, those vessels cost around $350 to $450 million each. So the focus today is on how expensive LNG has become, because maybe 3 years ago you could order vessels at or 3 or 4 vessels, you could order vessels at about 180 million. Today the price is up to 240, 250, maybe easing a touch. Actually, back in the early 90s, those same or smaller vessels, steam turbine, cost $350 million, which is quite amazing. Again, the order book, whilst it has slowed down, typically in shipping, when we look at what a healthy order book is, 2 years for most shipyards historically would have been considered a good amount of coverage. In the case of LNG, of course now new building is pretty much slowed to a halt over the last 6 months, but going back last year we had almost 4 years of coverage in some cases. So that's quite a significant change. And that has an impact. For example, people who would have been ordering LNG carriers speculatively are now faced with, when they were making these decisions, maybe last year or the year before, higher financing costs, longer lead time, 4 years before you start earning a single dollar of revenue, higher prices, 240, 250, 260, instead of 180 million. So the number of people looking to take those bets, the audience shrunk quite a bit. So you can see a consolidation in the number of people, the types of companies who are actively ordering LNG carriers, because the risk associated with ordering at the wrong time or not having a charter lined up has actually increased quite significantly. Again, here, the reason for showing this is those of you that follow maybe the crude tanker markets or the product tanker markets, if we look back to the early mid-70s, even the 80s, the amount of there was a disproportionate amount of oil tankers were owned by energy majors, oil companies as well, maybe 80% at one stage. And over the course of the next 20, 30, 40 years, that balance shifted from 70 to 80% to maybe 10 or 15%, and independent ship owners came into their own. So then what I'm wondering here is, are we likely to see a significant shift in the profile of those companies who own or operate LNG carriers? And you can see here that in the pinkish mauve color, we have NOCs, IOCs who own vessels, compared with, let's call them independent ship owners. And the proportions changed quite a bit, you can see, between 2010 and 2024. Now, because a lot of you are no doubt experts, you're directly involved in the markets, probably some of you can point out that maybe there's a fault or error in the way that I've aggregated or displayed ship owners, and you'd probably be right, because you can see that in many cases, large either integrated energy companies or some national energy companies as well have actually not directly taken ownership of the vessels themselves. They've basically negotiated with shipyards and then awarded contracts to third-party ship owners. So then there could be a debate as to who actually owns the vessel. Is it the National Energy Company or the IOC that actually struck the design with the yard and then novated these contracts to the third-party ship owner? So I'm aware of those shifts as well. So it's quite difficult to determine who you'd actually call the ship owner. You can see that in both cases, the vessel or the investment would appear on actually two different sets of balance sheets because of the way that IFRS 16 works. If you have a contract longer than a certain number of years, then even if it's a bareboat charter or whatever, so you'll probably have two people could theoretically claim to be the owner or operator of the same vessel. Anyway, I think, again, looking for, I don't know that, in my own view, which could well be wrong, but the way I see it at the moment is, I don't know that we're going to see a shift that will mirror or match exactly what happens in the crude or product tanker markets. I think the LNG market's unique enough to be somewhat different, and I wouldn't be surprised if that ratio continues and it does have a separate structure or participants than the other markets. Here, again, this is really emphasizing the same point that I just made. Again, I've explained to you a little bit about the background of ADNOC LNS and the markets we're serving. So I think for us, I see that the market has evolved. It used to be the case that we were doing point-to-point shipment. Those vessels that were built in the mid-90s, there was one customer, which was a Japanese utility. The vessels served that one client for 10, 15, 20 years. So we were part of an extended supply chain, and that was the way that LNG worked. Maybe in the past 5 or 10 years, and maybe a lot of other people had a very common point-to-point. You were part of the integrated supply chain. You had like basically a floating pipeline connecting LNG with point of origin with the one single customer. That's changed for us, and then that same fleet started to trade increasingly to a slightly more diverse range of customers, into Korean clients, Chinese, and even and India increasingly, and then a little bit to Europe, but not so much. What I can see now is that our parent company, which has now diversified itself. So what you see here is that currently ADNOC exports 6 million metric tons of LNG. By the year 2028, that number will have increased from 6 million tons to 15 million metric tons. And then by the year 2035, that number will have doubled again because the company I mentioned previously, XRG, intends to build up its own portfolio of 15 to 25 million metric tons in foreign producing assets. And you can see that my colleagues have been busy because they've acquired equity stake in next decade's project, Rio Grande in the US Gulf. We've acquired and formed a JV with BP, so a lot of the BP's assets in Egypt are now owned or jointly operated by ADNOC. We've acquired a 10% stake in Mozambique and also volumes in Azerbaijan, and more recently, just in the past month, announced a deal in Turkmenistan. So again, taking a step back, what implication does this have on a company like mine? It means we can't rely on a fleet with a point-to-point delivery because we have offtake rights in all of these locations. Again, because of its geographical location, Azerbaijan isn't likely to see any 175,000 cubic meter vessels going into there because of where it's geographically located. But a lot of the other volumes will require broadly identical vessels to the one that we've already ordered, 174 or 175,000 cubic meter vessels. So our own trading portfolio, our approach to owning, acquiring vessels is going to have to change to meet the needs. And again, probably some of you may work for Shell or the former BG. That's probably already the way that you're operating anyway, if you do come from that background. So a much more, the largest portfolio player, and similarly the Qataris as well. So already people are operating like this, but I see in our own environment, we're going to have to switch, adapt to the way that we provide shipping solutions to all of our affiliate companies. Excuse me. Because the profile of their business is no longer Abu Dhabi to solely Asia. It's going to become much more global in nature. And again, I think the totals here are maybe up to around 10 or 12 million metric tons. So that picture, at least from an ADNOC perspective, or XRG, is going to be populated by more likely another 3 or 4 dots around the globe. So again, the challenge for us to meet the needs of that particular client are going to change as well. So we'll have to find a different structure in which we can manage that growth. So again, I leave it at that. I'm not claiming to be able to predict the future. I wish I could, but I know that I definitely can't. But again, sharing a little bit of an insight as to how the markets have evolved, how I think what's happening in ADNOC is actually probably a good predictor of how the world in general might shift from this point-to-point delivery to a much more global trading portfolio. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justin, for a very interesting keynote. And with that, I'd like to invite our first panel session to come to the stage. So we have 3 interesting panels prepared for you today. The first session will be on the strategic role of LNG in energy security and the energy transition. Our moderator for the session will be Susan Sakmar, who is a visiting law professor from the University of Houston Law Center and a board member at Flex LNG. Susan, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, and I'll ask my panelists to come up on stage and join me as well. Hello, my name is Susan Sakmar, and I'm delighted to be here from America. I have not met many Americans here, so thank you for having me, despite all of the the unease, I guess, we're causing in the United States. But for folks that don't know me, I am a part-time law professor. I'm a lawyer by training and a part-time law professor at the University of Houston, where I teach a class on LNG and shale gas. So I've also spent quite a bit of time on shale gas, which you'll see may or may not be relevant, because we'll talk about LNG, but you also have to talk about pipeline gas, and that's where the shale gas comes in. Quite a number of years ago, I wrote a book on LNG, is how I found my way to LNG. And Justin, I thought, gave just a great sort of opening for us, because he raised many issues. He talked about the historic sort of point-to-point trade that was the LNG industry when I first started to research my book, going back 10 plus years. And over the years, we've seen how the trade in LNG has really changed from that point. And I always like to think of it as a visual, the point A to point B, point A being Qatar and the Qataris sending gas to Japan. That was really the genesis of the original LNG industry. And now, of course, over the years, it's grown much bigger. So I'm delighted to be here and we have a panel of experts, and what we're going to do is really sort of set the scene. Justin, I think, thanks to him, gave a great overview and touched on a lot of shipping issues, but we're going to sort of fill in some of the details on the wave of LNG supply that's coming. Our session is called Surfing the Incoming Supply Waves. So we're going to talk about that supply wave, and we're also going to talk just about the overall LNG markets in terms of supply, demand. Is demand going to be there to catch this wave, trade, and then geopolitics? So we'll try to fill in some of the gaps that'll give more insight for the rest of the afternoon. So I'm going to sit down and let the panelists introduce themselves and their company, and just share a little bit about what they do. Okay.
Yeah, I can start. Hi everyone, my name is Fraser Carson. I'm a principal analyst in the LNG research team at Wood Mackenzie. I am Woodmac's lead LNG shipping analyst, but I also cover supply and regas. I've been at Woodmac for close to 7 years. Before that, I was in corporate finance. I worked in banking. In my role, obviously, I'm doing research, looking at supply, regas, shipping, but I do support our consulting arm as well via commercial due diligence and lenders reports, things of that nature. So quite a broad remit. EMEA focus, Russian assets too, a global remit sometimes, depends on the nature of the piece. But yes, as I say, I've been at Woodmac 7 years. I'm based in Spain. I work remotely from Seville 100% of the time. So it's really nice to be here to see real people for a change. Really good. Remind myself that I actually work with people and not just screens. And yeah, really excited to be here with Susan and the rest of the panelists to talk about LNG.
Maybe, yeah, I can start. My name is Per Christian Fett. I'm heading up Fearnley's LNG department, which is around 25 people in a ship broker and advisory firm. We do traditional ship brokering in LNG, but traditional ship brokering in a shipping segment like LNG. LNG is still not the same as products and tankers and so on, but we're moving towards that, maybe that commoditization. Been in LNG for the last, or in Fearnleys for the last 25 years. Before that, being the shipping manager of a Snøhvit LNG project, which is kind of one of the, back to your Qatar time, I think we were competing with Qatar on volumes into Europe, and has a kind of maritime engineer and commercial background.
When you say Snøhvit, it reminds me, at one time in my book, Snøhvit was the northernmost LNG facility and benefited, obviously LNG is cold, so if you're coming from a cold climate, you get some efficiencies there, but I think maybe Russia has, I think Arctic maybe has overtaken Snøhvit in terms of the northernmost, coldest LNG facility. Yeah. Okay, thank you. John?
Hello, everybody. I'm John Sattar. I've been with Poten & Partners the last 20 years as an LNG and natural gas consultant. We're a US-headquartered shipbroking, business intelligence, and advisory firm. LNG is a very big part of our business. I'm a member of the LNG advisory team, and we've got 35 full-time staff across Houston, New York, London, Singapore, and Perth. Most of my time is spent working from the London office, but I also spent 6 years in our Singapore office working across the Asia Pacific, and very pleased to be here.
Okay, great, thank you. So you can see our panel, collectively, if we added up like, charter backlogs, 80 plus years of LNG. And so that's a reminder to me to let you know that we will take some questions from the audience, and we'll do it at the end. So obviously, let's sort of draw on the collective wisdom of our panel. And if you have questions, we welcome them at the, we'll leave the last 5-10 minutes or so for questions. All right, well, let's jump in. So this looming supply wave, I want to sort of talk about that a bit and give the audience some context of how big is this wave, where is it coming from, what impact is it going to have on the market. And maybe, I don't know if any of you want to touch a bit on, this is now in my mind the third big wave that's coming. And I don't know if anyone wants to maybe just touch on the first two waves, back in 2010, 2016. That wave mostly came from Qatar, right? Was the world's largest exporter.
And Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Qatar and Australia,
yeah.
right? Qatar and Australia. Then we had a second big wave starting in 2016 from the United States, right? Who is now the world's largest LNG exporter.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of a reference point for me is when I was writing my book, it was still at the time of, is LNG going to come to the United States? So a lot of analysts in rooms were asking, when is LNG going to come? We've built these LNG import terminals that were looking pretty obsolete. And lo and behold, and this is the relevance of shale gas, the U.S. was able to ramp up its shale gas production. And then what are we going to do with all that gas? And I can't tell you how many panels I was on talking about shale gas, and I kept saying, yeah, but that's not the story. Mm-hmm. The story is LNG, because what's the point of having a lot of gas if you can't monetize it, right? So LNG is really just a means to monetize natural gas that historically was stranded in the North Field in Qatar. And in the U.S., our shale gas was, you could say that was stranded gas too. Right? And so we've monetized it as LNG. And so the second wave came mostly from the US starting in 2016. Mm-hmm. And so now we have a third wave coming. So what is that third wave coming? Where is it coming from? And maybe we can start with, maybe John, you can say a few words about that.
Sure, yeah. So if you look at the big round numbers, the LNG market right now is about 400 million tons. 200 million tons is under construction right now. It's just astounding what's going to happen. Roughly 26 million tons is at risk. That's the Arctic LNG 2 project that is sanctioned, and it's 13 million tons in northern Mozambique, where Al-Shabaab has caused problems. Rwandan troops now in northern Mozambique mean that it's possible that that volume will advance. But 200 million tons is coming. We can comment later about what that means for the shipping business, which is fantastic.
It comes soon enough.
Exactly. But it'll get better. So of that 200 million tons, roughly 40% is from the US and 30% from Qatar. 70% from two countries. The gentleman from ADNOC was speaking earlier. Waste is very important. That's another 9 million tons. And LNG Canada. These are the big supply sources. But it's really a US-Russian story, and it's an amazing one.
Anything to add?
I think that covers.
Okay, we'll come back to you on the impact of shipping. And Fraser, I don't know if you want to add anything about the third wave that's coming. Anything from Australia? Australia has historically been a very large LNG exporter.
Yeah, the Pluto expansion is under construction as well. But what I would say in terms of the US and Qatar supply, so to give some numbers to that, we're seeing this year, 2025, 14 million tons of growth. And in the next 3 years, 26 through to 29, it's over 30 million ton of growth in each year. So, really significant volumes. And I'm sure we'll cover it when we get to these questions later on around demand and stimulating demand. But as Justin mentioned in his address, all that supply will bring down global LNG pricing. It's whether it's at an affordable enough a level to really stimulate that demand in those emerging markets, particularly in the Pacific Basin, I would say. So yeah, it's a good story, potentially a very good story for LNG shipping in terms of rebalancing the market, but there are caveats. And I'm not going to talk about them now, but we will get to them.
We're going to talk about, we'll get to the caveats and
Yeah.
the demand issues and the geopolitics, because you'll see LNG industry is quite complicated.
Sure.
There's a lot of moving parts. But let me ask you, Per Christian, so we've talked about this supply wave, and I sit on the board of a shipping company, and so we can't wait for more supply to come on. And one of the reasons I like being on the board of a shipping company is most of my time has been set with LNG project developers. So when you talk to those guys, they're always talking their book. Every project is the biggest, bestest, most expensive project, and they're all going to go forward. But in shipping, we really try to rank the projects, and we have no dog in the fight. We want them all to go. Every single project, the more the better, the more shipping. So what is this wave going to do for shipping? What does the current fleet look like now?
I think, the big uncertainty in shipping is where it's going to go. The volumes are quite certain. Okay. Yes, they normally get slightly delayed. The ramp up takes slightly longer. Ships come on time. But that can be handled. The big question now is where the volume's going. If it goes to Europe, we need 30 ships for 30 million tons. If they go to Asia, we need 90 ships. And that's a huge difference, assuming that they won't use the Panama Canal. So that delta there is quite a big swing factor in the shipping market. And right now, most of it goes to Europe. So we are kind of, explains a little bit of the softness in the market. But as volumes come, as most likely then prices will come down, that will stimulate more demand from price-sensitive markets, which tends to be more east of Suez. So that will be will probably rebalance the shipping market going forward.
Right. All right. Well, let's get into the sort of the outlook for, I guess, for demand, right? Because as you pointed out, Per Christian, it really impacts ton miles, right? How far are these ships gonna travel the globe? Europe is closer to supply. Asia's a little further, so you add some ton miles there. So let's talk about, since we're in Europe, and since Europe has been really the focus of news for the last 3-4 years. With the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Europe has regained prominence in the LNG world. So what kind of demand can we expect out of Europe going forward? And first of all, what was the demand? We just in the last week had a slew of annual reports come out from Giganel, IGU, Acer, highlighting all the trade figures. And I was sort of astonished at the trade figures from Europe. So how big of an LNG importer is Europe? Yeah, John?
Oh,
go ahead, John.
Start first. Big round numbers, and this is looking out 20 years. We're a bit more conservative than ADNOC was in their presentation. If you say the LNG market 20 years from now is roughly 600 million tons, a bit more than that. Europe is about 150, we think, and the rest is in Asia. Europe, from a LNG demand perspective, from our point of view, is essentially flat, and that's Russian replacement, and not much more happens. All the growth is going to be east of Suez. And I'll just say one brief thing and then hand on to my colleagues. There's this underlying dynamic of when you get richer, you consume more energy. And it's basically a one-for-one relationship between per capita income growth and a country's tons per oil equivalent energy demand. It's a 45-degree line for all intents and purposes. As Asia gets richer, it's going to consume vast quantities of energy, and there's clearly a demand from people. There have been riots in Thailand over plans for coal-fired power plants. There's clearly a demand for clean energy. And this is the role that LNG has to play in servicing that demand in Asia.
Yeah, look, I can speak briefly about the European story. I think there's a very strong argument, and this was put to me the other day by somebody that I was speaking to, that when you're talking about European LNG demand, it's here to stay for the long term, and actually over time through to 2050, the proportion of LNG in the supply mix for Europe increases over time compared to piped imports. But I would say that this argument that the geopolitics, which is absolutely central to the European story, they've never had a greater influence on what's happening here. And the big question, the big thing, and we'll talk about it probably more, is Russia. But there is potential that we see at WoodMac in our base case that LNG demand will peak in Europe early 2030s or so, mid 2030s, around that time. But you have within that separate stories that could unfold, like perhaps the phasing out of Russian LNG, which is contributing around 14 million tonne or so per annum from Yamal at the moment. So there could be a point in time, 27, 28, when that comes in, if that comes in, that Europe needs to look for new supply sources, and that disrupts the rest of the market too. And to John's point about growth, yeah, undoubtedly, Asia Pacific and Southeast Asia and South Asia is where demand growth in the long term is. But it's this question about affordability, and despite riots potentially in Thailand about clean power, ultimately it's the bottom line that matters, I believe. And whether LNG is competitive against coal, that's the real question. And currently, it's not. But it can be if we continue to invest in supply.
But it's kind of, it's interesting, but the whole point of liquefying LNG is to bring it to another market. Mm-hmm. And we get more and more traders involved in LNG, which creates liquidity and so on. But they also focus on delivering the cargo to the best paying market in the world.
Yeah.
So suddenly, and the best paying market shifts. So it's kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. But the more LNG we have, the more tradable LNG we have, the more LNG will start, trying to find the best paying market.
Absolutely.
So that's the point of liquefying, so we can bring it to the best paying market. And that's going to be interesting going forward, because the best paying market could shift very quickly.
Right. And well, let's sort of dig into that, because, I don't know the level of knowledge in the audience, but it does. So that really, part of our mandate on the panel is to talk about energy security. So when you think about LNG, historically, the best paying market were the countries that were very worried about energy security. So if you're very worried about energy security, you're willing to pay up, right? And this was Japan. So, Japan was historically the best paying market for LNG because their alternative was fuel oil. Japan has no indigenous energy production at all. So they had nuclear and they had LNG. And so they historically were the best paying market. And as you said, that shifts depending on a country's energy security issues, which is what we saw in Europe. And so that's to me like a really interesting dynamic. So, let's maybe talk about, Japan. Is Japan still willing to pay up for LNG? Are they still the world's largest buyer of LNG? And for folks in the industry, one of the real energy security moments in the LNG industry in the past, now we're going back 15 years, was Fukushima. Mm-hmm. And so maybe, Fraser, you're nodding, and Per-Kristian, right, maybe you can tell us a bit about Fukushima and that tragedy and how that impacted Japan, because it really upended, similar to the Russia invasion of Ukraine, Fukushima upended the LNG markets.
Yeah, look, I genuinely believe that LNG's role in an energy transition world is one of supply security. And you mentioned the Fukushima disaster in the opening and just now. And what we saw post-Fukushima was an increase in spot trade, predominantly from Qatar and the Middle East over to Japan. And that was during a time when spot trading wasn't as we know it now. It was an evolution, it was an adaptation. And there was a facilitation of those transactions that allowed those LNG to get to Japan where it was most needed. There's actually an argument to be made to say that what happened in those events there laid the foundation for the LNG spot market as it is today. So that was one instance where LNG really kind of proved its credentials in terms of supply security. But then fast forward to the European energy crisis, the global market's a bit more liquid. There's more supply, albeit at a highly premium price. But the real response there was around infrastructure, getting the infrastructure into the right markets that needed to import LNG during that period. And we're talking 6, 7, 8 months from conception to design for these regasification facilities with FSRUs. Probably never considered ever in the project developers' heads, that could be done. But the LNG industry reacted, it adapted, it got the infrastructure in place. And I think for that reason, LNG continues to be at the forefront of energy ministers and governments and policymakers' minds when thinking about supply security. And I think it's a crucial role that LNG will play going forward in an energy transition world for that reason.
Yeah, I agree. And also what comes to mind for me for Fukushima, in part because I just saw, we're seeing a lot of talk now about nuclear, right? So LNG has to compete against coal because a lot of developing countries still have indigenous coal that they may want to develop. China has a lot of coal. But now you're seeing this sort of nuclear renaissance. And I do read a lot about criticism from Europe, criticizing Germany for getting rid of their nuclear facilities, which they did in a way after Fukushima. So Fukushima was a earthquake and tsunami that knocked out all of the Japanese nuclear reactors. So it was quite an environmental disaster, and it really gave rise to fears of nuclear energy. But now, lo and behold, 15 years later, now, Facebook just signed a big deal, Meta just signed a big deal to revive some U.S. nuclear facilities. But as an LNG person, at the back of my mind always is, one more incident like Fukushima, and then that changes the game because people go, oh, well, there's no perfect solution, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that Fukushima really was a game changer against nuclear. Now we're seeing a renaissance to nuclear a bit, and we'll just see how it plays out. And of course, there's different technologies that have come up. But Fraser, you really pointed out how the LNG industry sort of rose to the occasion, and it was in a bit the perfect storm because by then U.S. didn't need imports, so they were able to shift all those volumes to Japan, which required ships. Right, Per Christian. So, I don't know back then. We had the shipping fleet to do it. So.
Well, we struggled. We had a lot of incoming calls, which is not so frequent when you're a shipbroker.
Right.
But at that time, it was it was a rush for the ships in the first place, and we've seen that a few times in the industry, and I think also that's why. Again, back to the basics. You ideally would like to transport the cargo to the best paying market. Well, then you need to build a fleet for that, and you kind of constantly have to be slightly long shipping because it's not necessarily the best paying market today. There's also a time element there. You may have to, the best paying market may be in a month in Europe, so you hang on to that cargo for a month.
Right.
But okay, that's seen from a trader perspective. We still have a lot of buyers involved in LNG that are more focused on bringing the cargo home at a pre-agreed price so that they can provide power at a stable price level to their customers again. So we have this kind of shift between two players in the LNG market that have a little bit different views and ways of using ships.
Right, right. Well, let's talk a bit about, I don't know, John, if China, right? China's the world's largest buyer of LNG. That's a new development in the last, 10 years, right? But, did they take all their LNG? Did they take all their offtake?
Well,
or any of their offtake?
if we look at the situation now, the answer is no.
Right.
And this has some good implications for Europe in that you've got some very big state-owned energy companies in China with large LNG portfolios that they lift out of the US, basically reselling it into Europe. That's good for us here. There's a shipping impact, of course, as Per was saying, in that you're reducing your ton miles. That creates pressure on your charter rates. I can go on, but I thought just two comments to make there around benefits to Europe and impacts on shipping.
Right, right. And China has not taken any U.S. cargoes, even though they have offtake.
Yeah,
from the US.
Currently, and I suppose the interesting thing when I'm modeling ton mile demand in my day-to-day is that certainly into the end of this decade, ton mile demand globally is supported by this US East to China trade via these long-term contracts that were signed a few years back. Now, what happens to those long-term contracts? We're talking about much bigger volumes than we are today, obviously. But if they're redirected, it's probably to the downside for LNG shipping demand, you would expect, because they'll go probably into Europe or somewhere close by. So I think that is a slight concern. If you were to force me, which you're not, but I'm going to be forced anyway, I would say that probably the majority of volumes are taken into China. There will be some kind of resolution to this, I would hope. Maybe if I'm an optimist.
Yeah.
What's interesting is to look at China's import capacity and how they have expanded not only in number of terminals, but also number of storage tanks at each terminal. I'm quite surprised, and it shows that there's huge ambitions. I think what we've seen the last 6 months is maybe not what we'll see the next 5 years.
Right. But you're right, huge ambitions in China, and also very, very thoughtful, right? I mean, they've built a lot of storage, and so maybe we can say a few things about that, because natural gas storage, especially for Europe, is really key. And it's key for demand, at least for sure in the near term for Europe. So what's the sort of role of natural gas storage? And let's start with Europe, since it's such a big factor.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's essential during the winter time, cold winter, and that's how it's historically been used. And I suppose in recent years and months, the impact of storage has been the regulations set, around storage refill targets. And you saw what that did to pricing. There was a big premium built into pricing because of these refill targets and having to meet specific deadlines associated with those. And then you see, how it's impacted when there's derogations given out and your relaxation of those targets. Pricing came down quite significantly, quite monumentally. So, yeah, it's significant, and it's certainly driven pricing. Regarding China's storage ambitions, it's an interesting move. Potentially allows them to become, these ports to become more trading hubs, so to speak, re-exports, that kind of thing, waiting for the opportune moment to resell that LNG. So a very strategic move, I would say, on part of the Chinese.
So let's remind the audience, what's the EU storage requirement?
I think it varies by market now, right? It's not the same across the whole thing.
It was 90% by November.
It was
roughly.
90% by November, but now each other markets have been given derogations depending on, their storage inventories and how much they can bring in and what capacity they have. So it varies over market, and because of those moderate relaxations, it's we've seen a reduction in pricing because of that. It's not so stringent anymore. It's not just 90% across the board in the EU.
Right. Okay. So what are storage levels now, roughly?
I couldn't tell you. I think they're doing okay. They're a little bit lower than they were last year. That's for sure. But I couldn't give you a quantifiable number.
Quite a bit lower.
Quite a bit lower.
I think we have a little bit of a job to do until November in Europe.
Well, and it varies by country, as you said, Fraser. I mean, I think Germany is quite low. Their storage levels are quite low, and this is something like in the U.S. Now that the U.S. is the biggest exporter, you see it getting tracked by a lot of people, not just analysts, but people on social media, and they're tracking feed gas to the U.S. facilities, tracking European storage, right? And so storage is running a little bit low. So I guess for me, I'm wondering, is Europe, will they be well equipped this winter? Are they setting themselves up for another spike in prices because they failed to store enough gas, or is it a bit of a wait and see, hope for the best, wear another sweater kind of moment?
How good are you at forecasting the weather?
Well, you can get pretty decent weather forecasts now too. You can sort of anticipate maybe a cold winter or not a cold winter, and an El Niña, right? So there are some decent forecasts.
But we've had quite a few warm, mild winters in Europe the last years. I think it's kind of saved us a little bit, us being here.
Okay.
And I think our memory is slightly short in some ways. So last year it went okay.
Right.
Let's try this year as well. I remember in the old days in LNG, where LNG wasn't that liquid, we had a Spanish government that kind of instructed some of the players to have some extra cargoes just floating outside in case we had a cold winter. Yeah. Maybe we will get back to that, and we don't need to build necessarily the physical storage in Europe. But we'll see.
Right.
But certainly the ramp up of US projects this year helps in terms of availability for supply to Europe, even if it does mean buying at a premium. So that supply ramping up, because it wasn't really there last year. This year, there is more supply availability.
Yeah, we talk about storage, but where I'm from in the UK, we have none. Literally nothing. So we need those LNG ships to be lining up in the west bit of Wales and east of London. But the good thing is that, and this is normal practice, you could say globally, maybe 30–40% capacity utilization relative to your installed LNG import capacity. And in the UK, I mean, at one of the biggest terminals last year, it was 14% capacity utilization. Historically, you draw a line, roughly 30%. In other words, there's a lot of ability to bring LNG into the market. And it's critical in countries that, A, don't have natural resources, that is all of North Asia, excluding China, and critical countries like the UK, which don't have underground gas storage. So it's got a vital, vital balancing role, and price-setting role as a result as well.
Well, it does make me think, though, we should talk a little bit about sort of LNG contracts and the role that those play, you know, short-term contracts versus long-term contracts, and storage plays a role in that. But, you know, from the U.S. side, you know, we're eager to have more European buyers. They're good, credible, credit-worthy buyers. We love European buyers in the U.S. We'd like more of them, and we'd like them to sign longer-term contracts, and they seem a bit reluctant. Right, you see there's a bit of a short-term memory issue. We're fine, we're fine until we're not. And then the world competes for cargoes, right? Which is, you know, that's one approach, right? But then you run the risk of, one, not getting cargoes, although less of a risk now because there's so much more LNG trade, but really paying up. And we saw that with the outside of the Russian-Ukraine conflict, and prices just soared. And I look back to that time and I think, you know, what were people doing like before COVID and during COVID? Because that was a great time to store cheap gas, but apparently nobody did, right? And so if you wait for the absolute rock bottom, you usually miss it. Right, so what are sort of your views on sort of contracts and how the trade in the contracting world is evolving?
I'll go first. I mean, markets function correctly, is what I'd say. And the spot market in particular functioned very well. And the US was essential to what happened. By far the largest spot supplier of cargoes into Europe. And there's a direct link between shale gas. You said you started your career looking at that and written a book about it. Shale gas and security of supply. You've got a break-even price for US gas of around $3.50. You've got prices in Europe that are multiples of that. You've got enormous quantities of liquefaction capacity being built in the US, and that's going to be providing security of supply. It's going to be providing the spot volumes that we need to fill storage.
So you're arguing for more of a spot. The spot's going to be there, so no need for longer-term contracts to get that security of supply, because we think the spot market will be robust enough.
Spot has been there, and I'll let the other panelists address this issue as well, but clearly there's reluctance with the energy transition for European utility companies to enter into long-term contracts. They've just not been willing to do it, is a fact.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the contracts that have been signed recently, and I'm talking about 2 years prior to present day, by European utilities, 10, 15-year deals, some from the Middle East, UAE and Oman. Equinor did a deal with Cheniere. Each of these suppliers already have operational trains, and they are able to sell on maybe shorter terms because of that. I think it's much more difficult for a greenfield US LNG project developer to say, who doesn't have an operational train, to say, yes, I can go get financing on a 10-year deal. That's where the difficulty is. European buyers are reluctant, obviously, because of net zero ambitions and various other things, to commit to those long terms. So it's a difficult one. But I actually think that the rise of US LNG is also a good flexibility thing for Europe too, because it's predominantly FOB sales. And for the LNG shipping industry, actually, that encourages investment in LNG shipping, I believe, FOB sales, either directly or indirectly, because the off-taker in this situation can dictate where that cargo goes. You know, we talked about whether it's a premium market or whether it's into the home market as well. So whether they are investing directly in LNG shipping capacity, placing their own order, or via a charter agreement with a ship owner, there is that investment. And actually, even if you go further down the value chain, it probably encourages investment in regasification capacity too, because the last thing you want as an off-taker is a full LNG ship with a full cargo and nowhere to unload it. So to have that security around FOB contracts, of which there's definitely going to be more because of the US capacity coming online, it does also encourage investment in shipping and then probably in regas too, I would say. So it's not all downside for US LNG and the fact that they can't get those 20-year deals. I think there is further investment across the LNG industry because of those FOB deals.
Yeah. And we've also seen US project developers taking on a little more risk, right? And bankers, because it really comes down to, historically, these long-term contracts were needed to underpin financing. Mm-hmm. So really, it's the bankers driving it, right?
But this is where the intermediaries, the aggregators, the portfolio players are so important. Mm-hmm. The gentleman from ADNOC was describing how they're basically going to become a portfolio player. And you talk about the Shells, BPs, and others who are willing to enter into these long-term contracts out of the US, but taking it into their own portfolio. In other words, they're warehousing these volumes, and they will then on-sell to the best-priced market. It's the commoditization of LNG, really. But these intermediaries are very important to providing that flexibility. But they take on the long-term obligation, and they'll sell short or medium term.
And if we get more and more of that, I think we'll have the consumers in Europe will be the one paying a bit of that risk, because they will have to pay up if they need the gas. Yes. And I'm a little bit surprised that after what's happened in Europe and so on, we haven't seen more Europeans, call it end users, buying LNG long term.
It's because they listen to us about the next supply wave,
Right, they're looking at the next supply wave, thinking, right, it's going to be there'll be LNG available, but they'll have to compete for it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. And and maybe of course, then you also hear whispers of and you touched on it a bit, Fraser, but Russian gas. Mm-hmm. And what's the outcome of any sort of peace agreement? And is Russian gas coming back to Europe? And then is it pipeline or well, Russian LNG still flows to Europe, right? Yeah. A lot of it.
But the EU has now said that's going to stop.
Okay.
And it's last year was 16 million tons. Yeah. Very important for Belgium, France, Spain, the Netherlands. But it's around 17 cargoes a month, roughly speaking, right?
Okay.
So with this supply that is coming to the market, Europe can substitute that Russian LNG.
Right. Right. Now's the moment.
That's the objective.
Right. If they're really serious.
Yeah.
Right. So
and they are.
Okay. Then if that is a serious, yes, we're serious about it. Sort of now is the moment you can sign deals with the U.S. or Qatar, whoever has volumes, Canada, and you can ensure you lock in that supply, and you can wean yourself from Russian LNG.
Yeah. And just to add to what John was saying, I agree with his kind of thesis there. But I think it's important, because we're here at Nor-Shipping to talk about the shipping aspect. I think there could be potentially a knock-on effect for LNG shipping if those volumes come out of Europe, and Europe has to source new supply from the global pool. Of course, yes, there is more supply available, and we're not likely to see the price spikes that we saw in 2022 or anything. But there will be some elevated pricing because of that. And as I mentioned before, if it's elevated enough to deter opportunistic buying in price-sensitive markets in Asia Pacific. If they are put off and they don't buy LNG, they burn more coal, for example. That's to the downside for LNG shipping, because it reduces the requirement for cross-basin trade, which ultimately, from an LNG trade perspective globally, that's what underpins shipping demand, this cross-basin requirement. So yeah, I think there is potential for some small downside. It might not be huge, but I think the impact for shipping, if there's a phase out of Russian gas into Europe, could be to the downside for LNG shipping in terms of cross-basin trade.
Okay. So talking about LNG shipping, so now with so much supply coming on, there is an opportunity now to wean yourself off of less supply, less reliable suppliers like Russia. But what does it mean in terms of LNG shipping? It also, there's a lot of still older LNG tonnage out there. So is, now the moment for more scrapping?
Yeah, I think we have. I mean, the vintage fleet in LNG has a challenge. It has an age challenge, it has a technical challenge, and it has a commercial challenge. But it still stores LNG quite well. So there is a opportunity there for some floating storage or some sort of terminal work. But we've, in some ways, luckily, we've seen a very strong development in LNG shipping and transportation. I think the shipping industry have cut, cost of transporting LNG from A to B quite dramatically, and that's one of the reasons why we have Asian buyers coming to US to buy LNG. That's quite a long haul.
Right.
But with a 174 two-stroke low boil off and all that, or even bigger ships, 200 cubes. We're able to transport it at the price which is quite attractive. I think we'll continue on that route in shipping, but we've taken some big steps. Now it will be maybe smaller steps in reducing, call it unit freight cost in shipping, but. The vintage ships that were ordered at $350 or something, relatively fresh prices, are different animals than today's bread and butter ship.
Right.
And if I could just touch on something there that Per Christian was mentioning in relation to LNG's role and decarbonisation of LNG, because I think that's really important. I think the energy transition is a transition. We have to remember that. There's a reason we don't refer to it as the energy replacement. LNG is going to be in the energy mix for decades to come. It's just at what quantity, right, and how quickly it's phased out. For LNG, and this is important, I think, for LNG shipping, for LNG to remain part of that conversation going forward, there are two things that need to happen. The first is that there needs to be continued decarbonisation across the value chain across the LNG industry. We've seen great technical innovation, great technological advancements already. That needs to continue. But number two, which is arguably much more important, is that there needs to be a continued positive communication and promotion of the benefits of LNG being in the energy system. And that's at a much higher level than just us sitting in this room and speaking to other energy colleagues. It's at a governmental level, it's at a minister level. It's publicly promoting the benefits of it being there. And I think that's absolutely critical for LNG going forward. And that will stimulate buying in the Pacific Basin, and that will help LNG shipping in the long term.
There's enormous commercial weight behind LNG as a fuel for shipping. 644 dual-fueled LNG vessels are on order. You contrast that with the other two great hopes, right? Methanol and ammonia, and yes, Maersk has made some commitments, but not a lot of movement on those other two fuels. So the outlook for LNG as a fuel for shipping, from a commercial perspective, clearly there's that belief. But there is another dimension to this, which we haven't touched on, which is regulation and policy. And the IMO has set us some difficult challenges ahead, where LNG does fall below the tiers from which you then start have to paying $100 per ton for your emissions. But from the early 2030s, LNG falls out of that bracket and is no longer compliant. So enormous commercial interest in making it happen, yet this new policy challenge, which is going to be formally ratified in October. But from the point of view of LNG being a fuel, it's fantastic. From Singapore, I can see the black smoke coming out of the stacks of all these ships going back and forth. It's horrible. With LNG, you basically eliminate all those particulate emissions. And you get that 25% reduction in CO2 as well. It's clean. So, there's some real positives around it, but some policy challenges too.
Right. Absolutely. And, but, one thing about the industry, it can navigate that, right? You're seeing it in the U.S., a continued focus on reducing emissions. And in terms of emissions, our emissions in the U.S. have gone down significantly in the last 10 years because we transitioned more of our coal plants to natural gas plants because we had the natural gas supply. And that's been a direct driver of the U.S. reducing its emissions. So, as you point out, for some of the coal countries, if we get the pricing right, the pricing mechanism right, LNG can be an important driver of reducing emissions around the world for sure.
But that's where pricing is so important. I mean, if LNG is not competitive, you quickly lose, demand, because they will opt for a coal-fired power plant, and that will run for 20 years. So you
Right.
it's difficult to switch back.
Right.
So LNG needs to be competitive also in as fuel and for ships, but also as a commodity to compete against the other alternatives, especially for producing power.
Right. It sort of brings us full circle to the big LNG supply wave that's coming. So it's only going to get more competitive, right? The more supply comes on. I think that'll for sure help pricing this third wave that's coming sooner. In the next few years, it's not very far off. It's already starting. So we're getting short on time, but I did promise I would open it up to audience questions. If anyone has a question for one of our panelists.
Must have been a thorough analysis.
Yes.
Hi, Paul Thorson from Thornav in Houston. I'm a consultant for maritime transportation. But I was going to ask about the U.S. supply is now the biggest in the world and growing fast. And of course, everyone says there's an endless supply of natural gas. Can that be challenged with the new terminals coming and maybe domestic demand? And how would that affect the supply coming out of the U.S.? Can you see terminals selling back into the U.S. market and thereby driving down the LNG supply?
I think the big thing for U.S. domestic demand is around potential investment in data centers and AI. And that's, we at WoodMac did some analysis on this recently, and I think we see the power load associated with data centers increasing by 300% from today through to 2050. And the potential for gas demand growth within that is absolutely massive, but it's quite a broad range, right? Depending on the level of investment, we're talking about potentially 10 BCM of growth or 60, 70 BCM of growth in the next 10 years or so, maybe even shorter. So what does that do to pricing? It increases Henry Hub prices, most likely. And that has a knock-on effect into the LNG contracts, which are linked to the Henry Hub. So I think that's where some of the issue is, or some of the potential challenges. The downside risk, I think, to this demand outlook on data centers relates to a potential lag in the supply of gas turbines for these CCGT power plants. Because we have, again, at WoodMac done some analysis on this, and demand is just astronomical. It's completely outstripping supply at the moment. And there is real logistical challenges around getting these gas turbines from order into the construction sites and getting these plants built. So perhaps it's not quite as rapid a demand growth story, but I think certainly that's what's going to help support Henry Hub pricing in the future. And as I say, the knock-on effect, because of these Henry Hub LNG-linked contracts, that's where you're going to see a higher delivered cost and ultimately impacting LNG trade because of that. I don't know if my colleagues have any.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I started on the Snøhvit project, and the whole ambition of Snøhvit was to sell the gas to the US, so things can change.
I mean, it's not a peculiarly American problem where data centers can't get grid connections. It's the same thing we have here in Europe with north-south electricity transfer. It's very difficult to build and slow to get grid connections. So this is the story of gas. Gas into these power islands. You can put a pipe to the data center, you've got your own little power plant or adjacent, and you are not connected to the electricity grid. So gas and AI is a strong story.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, and it was a good question because you are seeing a lot of news out of the U.S. because now we're all tracking feed gas to U.S. facilities very closely, and will there be enough gas? And my personal opinion, I'm one of the ones, and I was sitting more in academia when shale gas boom took off, was a little bit skeptical, to be honest with you. I was like, no, I don't know. I'm a little worried about domestic prices of natural gas. I was one of the ones that sort of urged some caution to the Department of Energy when they were thinking about approving LNG exports, and I have to say I was wrong. I underestimated our U.S. producers. And I probably won't make that same mistake again, because in the U.S., we not just have big players, but we have a lot of, mom and pop operators. Less than we used to, because some of them get gobbled up. But if there's a price signal to produce, we will produce a lot of gas. And as our shale gas has developed, it's also become a lot gassier. So there's moments in time when we have so much gas that we need to evacuate all this gas somehow. So data centers will take some, and then there's other limitations. LNG, that's been the real, I think, value to the gas industry in the U.S. is LNG is a big draw for that associated gas that would be stranded. Again, going back to LNG, if you have stranded gas, you can just keep re-injecting it, or if you can monetize it into a higher value product like LNG, it makes a lot of sense. So I don't know, I made that mistake once, so I'm not going to underestimate our oil and gas industry again, because I think they can ramp it up, and we won't be short of gas. I don't think. So, oh, okay, a couple more questions. If you don't mind, there's a gentleman there, and then a woman there.
So where was the person there?
Yes, but probably building up in that answer there. Probably in the power generation industry, gas is not necessarily, or LNG is not necessarily the most climate-friendly resource of energy. And yes, it might solve some problems in terms of flexibility, but at the end of the day, how can shipping serve the benefits of adopting a fuel such as LNG, for instance, or gas, of the power generation industry? I mean, if gas is not going to be there because it's not aligned with the decarbonization promises of each one of the countries, how can shipping actually benefit from that? Is shipping big enough to actually have competitive LNG and run on LNG for several decades?
I think shipping can be the forerunner, for sure, but it definitely requires collaboration across the value chain. If you want to have a clean LNG product, it requires decarbonisation upstream, at the transportation to the liquefaction plant, at the plant itself. And as I say, we have seen real advancement in that regard already. The maritime industry and the LNG shipping industry has been very good in that regard too. We talked about some of those things just now. I think, personally, looking at shipping in isolation to solve this problem of making LNG clean enough is not the solution. It's looking across the value chain and making sure. There was some comments yesterday during the leadership conference around, encouraging your clients and your collaborators to do, things together, get on board with a strategic vision. And I think that's what needs to happen across the value chain. Don't look in isolation at your one piece of that puzzle. It's the whole thing that you want to focus back on and make sure that at the end of the day, you're delivering a clean product that's competitive and affordable and good for the environment ultimately.
Just one other question there. Okay, so if it's supposed to be seen in isolation, and if shipping is going to be probably the forerunner of adopting this, where do we stand when it comes to the different regulatory frameworks and policies that are not necessarily really helping LNG in the long term?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked a lot.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that we can't control, but the industry is innovating. ADNOC is a great example with its UAE projects. Total Energy, another great example. Marsa LNG in the north of Oman, 1 million tons, supplied by a 300 megawatt PV plant, electrified drives, in other words, no emissions to air for all the compression needs. And we are producing, as an industry, we're going to be producing LNG with 1/10 the greenhouse gas emission load of the average of the industry so far. So innovation is taking place to try and address some of these challenges. There's only so far we can go. But these steps that are being taken in the Middle East are fantastic for our business. Electric drives are key,
Yeah, we see it on the shipping side as well. The focus on methane slip and so on are more there. It will affect how we run and operate ships, I think. It will affect how we spec the ships. But yeah, it's good to see that it's back in focus a little bit.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I know there is a break after this, so if you did have a question, I'm sorry if we didn't get to it, but you might be able to reach the panelists. And we'll just close by saying, there's lots of opportunity, I think, for LNG, and always some challenges. These questions were great, bringing in some of the regulatory challenges, and to sort of bring it home to, energy security, which is what really government should be focused on. So energy security meaning, is it available, is it affordable, and is it reliable? We didn't talk much about reliability, but that's a real key focus, I think, and a real value add for natural gas. You can run your power grid on natural gas, right? It's dispatchable and reliable. And so I think it's sort of up to our policymakers to come up with the right mix so that as consumers, we keep the lights on. And I know, Fraser from Spain, you had a big power outage, and other places are facing power outages. So there's no perfect solution, but I always think as a consumer, I just want my power on 24/7, and I don't really care what it takes, right? And so I think it's, and that's where, as you said, Fraser, we have some work to do in the industry to continue to tell, there's a bright story for natural gas, and that it can check all the boxes, right? And it's there, and the ships are there. I guess time will tell then how the markets continue to develop. So, well, thank you very much. If you join me in thanking our panelists, it was great.
Thank you. We take a very short break. I think we start in 7 minutes, 2:30.
Good. And Suryan, he's coming up. So good afternoon, everyone. I know people are still floating in, but I'm going to try and get us a little bit back on our original schedule. So welcome back to the second panel session of our LNG conference today. I didn't introduce myself before. My name is Eleni Lazaratu. I'm from Marangas Maritime, the LNG shipping arm of the Angelikousis shipping group, and I'll be moderating this panel session. So the topic of this session is future-proofing the LNG fleet, and what will our fleet look like in the next 5 years. I'll let the panelists introduce themselves before we get started. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Suryan Weria Simonovic. I'm Managing Executive Officer at the MOL Group. Part of my responsibility is to head up our Europe and Africa business. And I spend a lot of my time doing energy in that region and the Americas. Just to give you a bit more of an overview of MOL. MOL, if you're not aware, is one of the largest shipping and now infrastructure groups around. We run around 900 vessels. Of those 900 vessels, just over 100 are LNG carriers or derivatives of. We have different sizes, containment systems, and we're committed to participate in continue to grow our gas value chain business. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Sigve Låsheim, and I'm the CEO of BW LNG. And we are providing kind of two services to the industries. It's the traditional LNG shipping, and then we have our gas solution unit, which so far has mainly consisted of providing floating terminal or FSIUs.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Gillian Bucara. I'm from Kepler. I lead the LNG and gas business unit. So we are an intelligence software company. We provide vessel tracking, cargo tracking across the LNG industry, but also across a range of other commodities, anything that's floating, but now increasingly on land as well, for power and gas.
And last but not least, I'm Claire Wright from Hanwha. I manage Hanwha's European operations. For those who don't know, Hanwha bought DSME shipyard in Korea 2 years ago, and last year we bought the Philly yard in US. And Hanwha has a range of businesses from new builds, retrofits, new technology development, particularly related to the energy transition for shipping.
Thank you. So before we step into where we're going in the next 5 years, I think we should look a bit at where we are today. and how the LNG fleet has already come quite a long way in the past years. So obviously Claire Hanwha has been building LNG vessels for the better part of 3 decades. So what are the major milestones that you've seen until now, and what have been the drivers of those changes, and do you see those changing in the future?
So if we were sitting here 20 years ago, we'd probably be talking about steamships, 150,000 cubic. And fast forward 20 years, obviously we're talking about two-strokes, we're talking about the workhorses of the fleet being 174,000, changes in hull design, significant improvements in containment that allow a range of speeds to be adopted by the fleet depending on their trading requirements. And when we look forward, or when we look at what has driven the LNG fleet to today, the LNG fleet started, or LNG started as you couldn't put a pipeline between the export and the import place, so you used ships instead. I think the previous panel referred to them being essentially liner trades. That's how it started. And so the drivers were really the combination of growing demand for LNG, but needing to be cost effective to substitute with alternatives like coal, and the technology drive or the technology investment that enabled us to improve containment systems, to improve propulsion, to enable us to carry larger quantities more efficiently and further. When we look forward, I think the drivers will shift slightly, and particularly regulation, which was also, I think, mentioned on the previous panel. Regulation obviously will be the most significant driver when we look forward in terms of LNG ship design.
Thank you. So Ingvild and Søren, where you sit and talking about those drivers and what's going to be shaping your fleets in the next 5 years, do you see any trends coming out and designs becoming the new norm, both in terms of the major ship design components like containment or reliquefaction or propulsion, or even innovations and energy-saving devices and how those will come into play within our fleet? What's your take? Ingvild, go ahead.
Okay.
Ladies first.
Yeah, so I think, it's pretty obvious that regulation will be a major factor, and the biggest factor by far, especially when you look at, I'm on net zero and Fuel EU, which is essentially more or less the same thing, which is an interesting aspect in itself. Which is all about the energy or the greenhouse gas emissions from the different fuels. So it's essentially 2 things you can do. Either you take down the intensity of the fuel, or you reduce consumption, and essentially what you need to do is both. So I think this continued drive for energy efficiency is definitely going to be there. And then it's, of course, the big question mark is when the penalties is starting to kind of kick in, so you can make the business case for the more costly investments related to alternative fuels and the likes. So this is, I think, going to be the major drivers in the next few years. But exactly what it is, other than on the energy efficiency side, I think it's difficult to say. In BW LNG, I think digitalization, getting really kind of control of our data and using it for decision making. I think that's kind of where we think it's quite a big potential, more than the technology side in itself.
Okay.
So, Søren, what are you saying?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there, Ingvild. We're seeing the use of data being much more important going forward, and the instantaneous use of that data for better decision making is something that we're looking at a lot. Now, like many owners, we're also looking at all the fuel efficiency devices. Our charters require that. As you're probably aware, many owners don't trade their own fleet, but time charter out, and charters don't just require, but always kind of looking for the best innovations. And so we're seeing a world where, okay, we've looked at air lubrication. That's kind of been around for a few years now. Then I think there's shaft generators and all kinds of technological innovations that just make the vessels more efficient. One of the things that we're actually doing is just trying to see a wind-assisted propulsion. We have a thing called Wind Challenger, which is a rigid sail, telescopic rigid sail. We've installed already on our bulk carriers to test, and our first LNG ship with 2 of those is coming up out in 2026. So we're trying to reduce consumption, be more efficient as much as possible. But in saying that, we're also saying that, you know, the timing is actually quite interesting because the IMO came out of MEPC just at end of April, right? And so I'm sure, like BW and every ship owner out there, everybody's going through the calculations, right? And it's throwing out some very interesting points, and mainly that LNG is good in the short to medium term, but then there'll start to be some penalties around that. So then we're looking at, okay, well, how do we address that? You know, how do we get how do you say, cleaner carbon into the fuel, for example?
Can I add 2 remarks? I think it's 2 things, very different things. I very much agree with you. I think sales is actually starting to become really interesting. There's some technologies out there. And that's also linked to the digitalization need, because then you need data so you can actually not only do weather routing for avoiding a wind, but now actually you're going to seek the wind that you need in order to make the sail actually work. So that's one comment. The other comment, which I very different, is this is driving now a new interest from our charters, because I mean, in our industry, we are not the one paying for the fuel because they're using the boil off, and it's actually the charters. It's been very difficult for now to have a kind of constructive discussion with the charters around who's going to pay a kind of payment, because we don't really benefit from, I mean, we charter out for 10 to 15, 20 years, and we never get the benefit from all these energy saving devices. It's the charter, but still, they have been very reluctant to pay for it, and we haven't had a business case for it. But now, with the penalties that the charter will have to pay, then suddenly we have another dynamic, which I think is going to be very interesting, and it's going to also be an interesting challenge for the lawyers to find out how are we actually going to put this into our contracts, both existing, which is probably more difficult, and new.
For sure, and what you mentioned about those 10, 15-year contracts, actually, those are longer contracts than we're used to seeing now in our days. I mean, the 20-year contracts and 15-year contracts that underpin the first 2 waves of expansion in our industry, I think, is a thing of a past. And there's a lot of discussion that we need to have in the regulatory space. But before we go there, I mean, Claire, from a shipbuilder's side, what appetite do you see from owners for actually looking at these sort of more futuristic technologies?
So I think from an LNG design perspective, shaft generator, ALS have become almost standard choices because they do offer benefits and saving. There is interest in wind, but it does very much depend on the trade route of the vessel, which is, as Ingvild said, where the digital element comes in so that you really understand the operational profile of your ship before making the choice. But in terms of much more forward-thinking innovation, the constraints are, as Ingvild described. We do see, particularly with the IMO new rules, an interest in more flexibility because the future design, future fuels landscape between now and 2050 is perhaps not very clear. So we see a growing interest in hybridization, flexibility, making a ship at design stage more future-proof so that it's more easily retrofittable. So in terms of kind of interest in design now, we see a lot more interest in retrofit side of the business rather than, and then how you bring that into retrofitability for future for new vessels, that if we think about an LNG carrier that you order today, it will come to 28, 29. It will only be 22 years old when we look at 2050. That ship then has another 10 years of life. How do you future-proof that for a transition that we don't quite yet know exactly how it's going to pan out?
While we're talking about the vessel ages, and this was touched on a bit in the previous panel, obviously when we look at what will the LNG fleet look like in the next 5 years, that's not just the new buildings, but the existing tonnage as well. And a significant proportion of that tonnage is the steamers, that just by virtue of how quickly our industry has moved, are now facing challenges and have maybe fallen behind in issues like BOR or propulsion efficiency. So what is their role in the industry in the next 5 years, and do you see them continuing to play a part? And can these vessels be future-proof to a certain extent through refits or through operational profiles? So I'm looking in this direction because I know that you both have steamers in your fleet, so I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
You know, the industry has seen this thing coming for like 10 years now. like when are they going to come be scrapped or reduced? And I think people have tried to find ways to make better use of them or to improve the fuel efficiency. I think it has had very limited results. I think most people are targeting that part of that fleet, probably the nicer ones, will be used for floating storage, either as FSUs or converted into FSRUs. That's where I see not most, but the better ones going into. Over the longer term, I just they're going to get superseded, unless, of course, the shipbuilding prices just get so expensive and interest rates get so expensive, so high that it just continues to price these vessels into the market. But I doubt that's going to happen. I think there's just too much good technology out there, plus with the environmental challenges.
But what you mentioned about shipbuilding capacity, it's an important point because they still do make up, it's some 200 out of 600 ships. So if we're looking to replace that capacity, it's a serious uptake in vessels. But I think, Phil, did you
maybe 2 or 3 other perspectives to it. I think, do remember it's a third of our fleet, so it's a bit hard to see how we can kind of live without them for quite a few more years, though they are outdated. And honestly, the previous panel mentioned the same. They can be used for FSUs and FSRUs, but that's going to be a very small part. And this is not a huge market, so yes, a few will be used that, but that will not really solve the issue. And it is a really kind of sad thing because they're super well maintained, most of them in cost pass-through contracts. They've been through their 4th dry docking on a cost pass-through, so they're super nice vessels, but of course they're too small, they're burning too much fuel, and they're too high boil-off. But it is interesting to see, we have done some calculation on what the IMO net zero, because the beauty of the steamers is, of course, they have no methane slip. And suddenly, the penalties will be very small. So through our calculations, we see that in 2032, the fuel cost, including the penalties, will be on the same level. So then the steamers will be more efficient than the TFDs, which has big methane slip issues. So it is, some kind of strange things happening with these regulations that could kind of give them a second life. But if they kind of can survive the period we are through now, where it's definitely too many steamers or kind of vessels available with the delay in supply and everything going to Europe, I'm not sure about. So it's, I think the jury is still a bit out, but we definitely, they are on the sunset.
And I guess the other thing you have to remember, many of these are still in long-term contracts, right? So even though people want to perhaps get, today they have such a good deal on trading spot, some of the two-stroke vessels, they still need to break that contract, which also, if it's historical clauses are challenging, and you can't just. But once those contracts, as these gradually come off contract, owners will need to take decisions.
That's for sure.
And let's not forget, they can actually work quite well in regionals on a shorter trade, Mediterranean, Caribbean, Indonesia. So it is some pockets, but 200 vessels.
Yeah.
So let's talk more about regulation. It's come up a lot already in our discussion. So Gillian, what do you think are the primary regulations that will be shaping the industry, both in terms of vessel design and in terms of how vessels are being operated in the next 5 years?
Yeah, so right now we've got already in operation both the EU ETS and Fuel EU, both obviously only applicable to the European continent. The EU ETS is only applicable to the CO2 emissions. Later in 2026, it'll apply as well to methane and nitrous oxide. Fuel EU starting earlier this year, applying to both CO2, methane and nitrous oxide. So all of these will start impacting right now already the compliance for all vessels operating in that zone. In terms of the LNG specific vessels, what we see is that right now they fall below the threshold required. So actually they're going to be creating surplus credits most likely for a certain period of time, and they can bank these credits. So there's a lot of flexibility mechanisms in the policy that means that the surplus they create now they can use for lazy years when they're no longer in compliance. So essentially what it is that it gives them time to look for alternative fuels. And we see that kind of this ramification because, of course, the regulation applies to LNG carriers, but to all carriers, to all vessels. So actually, we see that, one of the implication is that we've seen a lot more appetite on the LNG bunkering side, and we've seen a market that's doubled already in size from a very small base, and particularly more interest for bio-LNG and synthetic LNG type of fuels. The IMO, in contrast, obviously has a global scope. It will only be sort of further approved later on this year, and I guess it can still have some elements changed. It's not sort of fully confirmed. But in contrast to Fuel EU, we see that, or the expectation from the market is that actually the compliance will hit LNG vessels much more quickly than Fuel EU. And so the direct compliance target, the more stringent target, very quickly quite a few vessels won't meet it. So there will be additional costs which will be borne by all of us here in this room, us consumers. And I think there'll be a question of what will be the impact on the pricing of the molecules as well, because actually ultimately that's what will take place, is that the consumers will have to modify the contracts for the buying of the LNG and will have to bear that cost. So we'll sort of see that as well come through.
Absolutely. And you talked about both regional measures and what's happening at the IMO. So how do you evaluate the importance of regional measures moving forward? Do you see those, both to you and to Ingvild, do you see those as becoming more or less important? Have they served their purpose? Are we moving towards a global standard and regional measures will be less important? Yeah. Please, Claire, yes.
Once the IMO, if the IMO does pass the rules in October, then under the EU ETS for EU Maritime, the European Commission is obliged to evaluate the IMO measures in comparison with the EU measures and see whether the EU measures are still needed. So there's an element of re-evaluation of those measures that will come once we know what the IMO introduces, which kind of sets a context for how regional measures will look, because I think one of the big objectives of the EU is not to have a double burden on shipping.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about what's happening at the IMO and what came out of MEPC 83. Obviously, I think there is concern within the LNG industry about the treatment of LNG under this proposed regulation. In the short term, and I'm talking about the LNG carrier fleet, do you see an uptake of alternative fuels like e-methane, biomethane, biodiesel, and are we ready for that, both from a technological perspective, from a logistics perspective, and costs? I mean, what will be the primary challenges that the fleet will face? I mean, Søren, do you want to start us off?
Well, like I alluded to a bit earlier, I think it's, you got to get the carbon intensity down. So, I mean, I can see, e-LNG or starting to get mixed in, not immediately, but over time as you start doing your math, everybody starts doing their mathematical calculations and figuring out when they need to secure some of this. The challenges of that, though, is that there's not a lot of this product around. So I think charterers, it's funnily enough, some of those charters are actually marketing the same product because they're part of major energy companies. But what I do see, I don't feel that propulsion systems will change on LNG carriers. I think the natural logic says that, to me at least, says that use the same fuel you're carrying, right? But try to make it as efficient as possible. So yeah, that's kind of my view.
And let's not forget, I mean, it is very efficient. The LNG will boil off.
Yep.
Yeah.
And using that instead of either using energy to relick it back or burning it to the GCU, which is just terrible, right? You are kind of creating CO2 emission without creating any energy. So this is actually a very efficient way of kind of just handling what is happening because of physics.
Yeah.
And you know, if we're going to start blending in biofuels and LNG, etc., which of course we could, the engines are, or the kind of boilers are more than capable of doing that, we'll have to install a tank.
Yeah.
A deck tank, which we have room for, but that's very costly. So how do we make? So you have to buy a very expensive fuel. You have to put on a deck tank, and you have to invest in relic as well, which requires energy. So it's very hard to get that business case to go. So I think for a while, LNG, even if we are then will be faced with a penalty, it will make sense to pay that penalty. Instead of kind of investing in this measure. And then, but another comment is, of course, what we should do and what we are doing is to reduce the intensity of burning LNG, which is all about methane slip. And that means using the engine that has less methane slip.
Yeah.
And it means working on different technologies to see if we can either remove it from the beginning, or capture it, or clean it out in some sense. And that, I think, and maybe we should have mentioned that earlier when you asked about kind of what is the trend for future development of the LNG carriers. I think that is going to be a big driver for which engines are going to be put into the new buildings, and also on innovation, for sure.
Yeah.
And maybe
Julian,
just
you
to
wanted to
add
add,
on
yeah.
this bit. So what we see in the order book is XDF, Mega, dominating the order book in terms of the engines. Actually, MAN has now discontinued the Mega, and we see maybe an uptick in MEGI, which are high-pressure engines, which have much lower methane slip. And then in terms of XDF, there's kind of more and more innovations announced to reduce further the methane slip. And I think it's also interesting to note that the Qatari fleet, so the large-scale fleet that's been ordered, has over 100 vessels for the 50 MTPA currently under construction. It's majority XDF, and that's really different to the QMax fleet previously, which was all SSD, so all purely conventional fuel. So, you know, there's clearly a real shift in the industry in the way they're tackling this problem. And yeah, fully agree that it's completely regulatory driven, and cost driven ultimately. And one additional point I wanted to mention on the bio-LNG piece, which is, you know, feedstock for bio-LNG, like the supply chain is immature. This is a nice way to put it. And Repower EU at 2022, when the crisis emerged, set very ambitious targets to increase to, I think, 30 BCMA production of biomethane in Europe, which are unattainable, like completely unattainable objectives. So, you know, of course, the shipping needs for bio-LNG will be sort of small in comparison, but still just sort of bearing in mind the fact that actually having bio-LNG at scale is a very ambitious and unrealistic today target, I think.
So let's talk about. Oh, Claire, please. Yeah.
I was going to come back in on methane slip, but
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. Then how is methane slip weighing on owners' minds, and how do you see that impacting on vessel designs in the next years?
so obviously from an engine manufacturer point of view, but there's been a huge focus on methane slip in engines over the last few years, and certainly the latest designs, particularly the MEGI design, is very, very low in methane slip. There's continued focus on reducing it to negligible amounts for new builds. There's also, from an existing fleet perspective, obviously a challenge in terms of the methane slip. So there is development of abatement technologies that can be retrofitted for installation on existing ships to reduce. But one of the challenges that I think we do need to address as an industry is how do we accurately measure on-board methane slip? Because under the regulations that come, under the life cycle assessment, if LNG has a fixed carbon factor that's based on a particular kind of engine, if you as an owner have invested in something better, you will want an accurate way of measuring to be able to prove that your system is better than the standards that you will otherwise be given. And measuring accurately is really quite challenging. And there is some technology development needed there to make sure, and then the trialling to make sure that they are measuring accurately what the methane slip is, rather than being affected by other things that are maybe coming out of the funnel.
And in terms of methane abatement technologies, and retrofits, Gillian, what are you seeing happening? Are the technologies ready? Are they coming into play in a major way?
So there's a number of consortiums to to bring different parts of the value chain together to work on these technologies. From an engineering perspective, it's a challenge that can be achieved, or it's sort of widely viewed that it's just a timing issue and it's going to take maybe the next 10 years. But actually, the expectation is that methane sleep can be reduced to becoming marginal. So it's just a question of timing, and you know, a lot of the investment is going into not just retrofitting, not just new build, but retrofitting, as you were saying earlier, because of course the idea is to reduce the methane slip on the existing fleet.
Maybe one more comment on it, because you know, the worst in class is the TFDs.
Yeah.
The 4-strokes, and we talked about, we have 200 steamers that is not, we don't really want in the fleet any longer, and then how many TFDs do we have? About 200 as well. So if all of these are becoming inefficient and can't be used, etc., that's it's a very good market for the yards. They should kind of
good news for Claire.
But this is actually a challenge for the whole industry, and it comes back to that. I think we have to just realize that we are going to pay, or the chargers is actually going to pay for this. And you know, if you look at what that actually means on the LNG price, it's not that much. So and they will cry, but I think we can actually afford it. I think LNG is still a very good fuel for the world, despite that the prices might go a bit up because we have to pay a bit more for the shipping.
Okay. Being in that environment, in that sort of more commercial environment, let's step away from the kind of technical and regulatory discussion that we've had so far and look a bit at the market. And what I think has been really interesting recently is, aside from the more traditional, you know, market issues that have been shaping how vessels are being operated, we're also seeing geopolitical issues like what's happened in the Red Sea, and of course regulation shaping how we're operating vessels commercially. So I think we've seen much more regionalization of trade. I think we've seen newer tonnage moving west, older tonnage moving east. We've seen a lot more parcel loadings, cargo mixing, FLNG, FSRU. We're doing a lot more interesting things now in terms of operation and commercial operation of these ships. So Gillian, what are the trends that you see in the market right now that you think will continue to be significant in the next 5 years?
So you mentioned the Red Sea, so the Houthi rebels started the attack, or the attacks on some vessels meant that trade of LNG through the Red Sea and through the Suez Canal has entirely stopped for the last sort of close to 18 months now. So that's a very big shift in pattern. But then equally, in sort of around the same time, a drought in Panama has meant there actually has been hardly any tonnage going through the Panama Canal either. And even though the drought has sort of receded, the very high costs and the complexity in booking tonnage through the Panama Canal meant that, you know, really virtually these two routes are just not being used today by LNG carriers, and a lot of the tonnage is now concentrating around the Cape of Good Hope. What's also not helped this and sort of compounded this is the fact that there's been a lot of deliveries of new builds in 2024 and in 2025, and of course we're going to continue seeing this. And essentially, I think it was mentioned in the previous panel, the shipyards have been sort of better scholars than the project developers, and they've actually delivered the ships on time, whilst the projects are lagging. And so what it means is that you've got an oversupply of tonnage essentially on the water, and that's, you know, led freight rates to decline from, you know, hundreds of thousands earlier 2024 and, you know, to below 10,000 earlier this year. So we've now seen rates kind of pick up a bit, but realistically, given the number of deliveries still coming this year and the further years, until the projects actually start up, you're really going to see still quite low utilization of the fleet and continue to have quite, and therefore that means that there's not going to be a lot of interest to flow US volumes away from the Cape of Good Hope because freight rates remain low.
So there is a lot of uncertainty, and you mentioned a lot of those issues about projects being delayed, vessels being on time, and the pressure that's placed on freight rates. At the same time, new building prices are high, and I think all of these challenges around regulation and trying to modernize the fleet may drive them up even more. So in that context, Claire, as a ship owner looking to remain competitive and looking to modernize and have a long-term strategy towards the energy transition, but facing high investment costs, I mean, what should they do?
Obviously, we've seen quite an inflationary environment since COVID, and that has been an inflationary environment that has affected the full value chain. So obviously, as a shipbuilder, we often get a lot of flack for new build prices, but essentially those prices are composed of the full equipment chain that we need to build a ship. The pressure on that, obviously, going forward will still be there because we need to make ships progressively more efficient. We need to introduce new technologies driven by regulation. And obviously, there's a market element to new build prices, and we have recently seen, some fluctuations in new build prices. That won't change. The shipping is a very supply-demand-driven market. So from an owner's perspective, when looking at fleet choices, certainly when I talk to owners, it's a combination of, well, what do I do with my existing fleet? So what retrofit options do I have to enable those vessels to trade economically for as long of their life as possible? What's my relationship with the charterers of those ships? Because as Ingvild has said, they're the ones effectively in the end who pay. And then what's my new build strategy going forward? And yes, we see low freight rates at the moment because vessels are being delivered in advance of projects. That always happens in the LNG market. This is not a new thing that vessels are delivered in advance of projects. If we look at the longer term, the growth that we expect in the LNG industry in terms of new projects coming on stream, the demand for LNG vessels will grow both in terms of fleet replacement but also new ships needed for growth projects is still going to be there. If we look at the energy majors, a lot of them have pivoted to really focusing on gas as a strong transition fuel for a long term, and we see some of the developments around particularly hydrogen being shifted back a bit, which means that the future for LNG is a really positive one.
That's good to hear. And as we come to the end of our session, I think we've talked about future-proofing the fleet in terms of technology, in terms of regulation, and even looking at, commercially future-proofing the fleet. We shouldn't forget that these very modern vessels still require people on board to operate them safely and people in the office to support those vessels. So let's talk a little bit about the human element as we close out our session. So to all of the panelists, how do you evaluate the importance of the human element in the next 5 years? And will finding and maintaining able crews be a challenge? And in talking about that, emerging issues like artificial intelligence and automation, will that affect our needs for the human element? So I don't know who wants to start us off, but I think I'd like to hear from all of you. Yes, Ingvild, please.
This is top of my kind of risk agenda, definitely. Just look at the order book today. Will require 14,000 new seafarers. Then hopefully we will scrap some steamers. They will come out, but not massive amounts. Because then we're going to have a squeeze. Then we'll not have enough ships. We cannot scrap 200 steamers. So just kind of think about 14,000 seafarers. And it takes 10 to 15 years to train a captain. This is just mind-blowing challenge for the industry. And something that I think we speak far too little about. But I think all ship owners are trying to do their best and thinking about it. So that's one thing. The other part is also more on the shore side, with the build-up of other kind of new business like ammonia and hydrogen. Where are they looking for competence? LNG, LPG, gas competence. That's what they need. So we are going to be a rare breed and very much kind of attractive for a lot of other industries as well. So this is a big challenge which we should not underestimate.
Absolutely. So
Yeah,
you want to add to that? Yeah.
I echo what Ingvild says. I think, there's so much demand on seafarers, but not only the demand. We're talking about also making all the vessels they're becoming more sophisticated. So the same steamers that you scrap, you can't take that engineer immediately and put them on a brand new mega vessel, you know, and then if you add on all the abatement technologies, you know, it's just not, it's not feasible. So they're not just the numbers, it's the sophistication.
True. Very good
Right,
point.
of the talent. And so what we've done at MOL, I mean, because we have a big order book, over 30 vessels, all contracted, and we just almost have had to industrialize this process. You know, we've set up academies in the Philippines and India to train our seafarers. Fortunately, we have a big fleet. We can bring them through the system, but like Ingvild says, it's just the volume is so much. But you have to do that. And please don't forget, I think, you know, there are, I would say, the responsible owners, and that do the training, because they need them for their vessels, and those that, you know, like everywhere else, you know, the job market's open, you can go work everywhere else. However, you also, in this industry, more than all the other ones, the tanker fleet or even the dry bulk fleet, a lot of long-term charters look for this. You know, they want you to follow the regulations where the people have been with the company for a certain amount of time. They have operated under a DOC, and all that is becoming much more important. So I guess my point is the investment for seafaring staff is very, very big, but also onshore. I mean, you know, we're looking for people onshore all the time because I'm like, I look at my responsibilities. I'm like, well, okay, here's ammonia, here's, you know, CO2, and there's just so much material and so much knowledge you need to cover.
The fan is opening.
So it's also becoming very sophisticated, you know, onshore.
Absolutely.
So.
Any last thoughts, Claire, Gillian, before we close out?
Maybe a quick last thought on that, particularly when we think about new technology development, and we're developing new technologies for ships, so abatement technologies with energy efficient technologies. So when you have, say, wind and you have ALS and you have other technologies, we are asking the crew to make them work together. Having them all running at 100% doesn't necessarily give you the best option. So that needs to be supported by shore, but we're also putting responsibilities on crews. And we think that younger seafarers will be energized by working in this digital environment. But actually, some of them I've spoken to, they find it a burden because it's an additional responsibility. So there's a challenge for us when we're thinking about putting new technologies on ships. How do we actually make crews' lives easier when we're wrapping all of that together?
Thank you. Gillian.
I'll just close up more on the onshore rather than the seaside. But I think on the onshore side, the regulation piece is really, I think, a huge burden because you're having to deal for new compliance, new tools, new kinds of contracts. And so, yes, there's a lot of training as well on that side to ensure that all of the administrative burden kind of doesn't sort of duplicate the load or just kind of quadruple the load.
Absolutely. Well, with that, I think we're just on time for the break. I want to thank all of the panelists. It was a really interesting discussion. Thank you so much for your time. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I guess we'll, 10 minutes back in about 10 minutes from now. Thank you so much. Okay, so welcome back for this third and final session of today's panels. The topic of this session is LNG and clean energy value chains, the role of floating solutions. So our moderator for this session will be Marta Sulas, from the VP of Yara Clean Ammonia. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you for letting me be the moderator of this very exciting panel. Just a quick background. I actually used to work in the LNG industry, but now I work in the ammonia industry. So it's a bit exciting to be here. Normally, I'm in these panels where everyone's kind of converted into the hydrogen economy, but in this audience, it's a bit different. So let me then start with just showing you the LNG value chain and then introduce the panelists. So we will start with production and liquefaction of the natural gas. We are going to have Carl Fredrik Staubo representing Golar, Please, you can come up. So when you do the liquefaction process, you reduce it, the natural gas 600 times. Yeah, please sit. You reduce it 600 times, and then it's really easy to transport. It's transported by LNG vessels, like the previous panel, and offloaded onto FSRUs, today represented by Erik Nyheim from Hög Evig. On board the FSRU, it's heated up again and sent up to the grid, represented by Dr. Petter Røtgen in DET. Please, can you come up? And then, of course, you know when you have LNG stored on board the FSRUs, you can also offload it onto small-scale vessels. So we have here Jonathan Quinn, CEO of Near LNG, representing the flexibility in the LNG chain. So we have a couple of topics today. We will start letting everyone introduce themselves. We'll talk a bit about the geopolitical situations, and then we might talk a bit about the hydrogen economy. I'll sit over here. So. I think let's start with Carl Fredrik. Maybe you can talk a bit about FLNG and the importance of your assets in the LNG value chain.
Yeah, hi everyone. So what we do is floating liquefaction. The advantage of floating liquefaction versus land-based is that you can put the liquefaction plant on top of the asset, in particular if it's in an offshore environment. The world today has plenty of stranded and associated gas that are currently not worth anything until you can monetize it. Golar then pioneered a floating liquefaction as the solution to monetize this gas. We produced the first FLNG in the world, delivered in 2018, which operates offshore Cameroon. And since then, it's been the best performing FLNG in the world. We now have in total in the company 3 FLNGs, 2 on the water and 1 under construction. All 3 are fixed on 20-year contracts with an EBITDA backlog of $17 billion before commodity upside. We have the ambassador for Argentina here, but we just concluded 3 weeks ago 2 of the Hilli and the Mark II as 20-year contracts in Argentina in a combined $14 billion deal before commodity upside. And then the vessel in the middle, Gimme, is just about to start a 20-year contract for BP this month. In addition to that, we have 3 growth designs. We're listed in New York. We have a market cap of $4 billion, an EBITDA backlog of $17 billion, and we want to order our 4th unit this year. We're the only service provider of LNG in the world, and that's where we take part in the LNG value chain.
Erik, maybe you would like to continue. How do you see FSRUs and your role in the value chain?
Sure. So Hög Evig, we're a global leader of providing global LNG terminals, or FSRUs. We have a 50-year legacy in LNG, and Hög was part of innovating the whole FSRU industry some 20 years ago. Golar was actually an early mover in this as well. Today, we operate a fleet of 10 FSRUs around the world. Half of the fleet is in Europe. We have a very healthy contract portfolio with, where the German state is our largest customer, and we have a number of other very solid counterparts in our contract portfolio. In addition to FSRUs, we are also developing new technology. So what we did 20 years ago for FSRUs, we're now working on for hydrogen. Right now we have a test plant up and running at Stord on the west coast of Norway, where we're testing our own ammonia to hydrogen cracker technology, which will be the only technology available that can be put on a floating solution. So you can then import ammonia, and we will crack it into hydrogen and send it into predominantly Europe. We also have a partnership with Aker BP for CCS. They have licenses, 2 licenses on the Norwegian continental shelf. So they will do storage, and we will provide the marine infrastructure, both shuttling and also export terminals where we can receive carbon, purify it, liquefy it, and shuttle it out. So this is why we changed the name to Hög EVI, Energy Vector Infrastructure. We're really broadening our scope in terms of providing infrastructure for energy use.
So Peter, as a distributor of energy, how do you see your role now, and maybe also a bit into the future?
Yeah. So I talk about this company, Deutsche Energy Terminal GmbH. And this is not only a classic business story, it's also a political story, I have to tell you. That means you all remember that the gas flow to Germany was ending in autumn 2022. And finally, with attack on the Nord Stream pipeline, there was really an emergency situation in Germany, but not only for Germany, but also for all the neighbors around, because Germany traditionally is a turntable for gas. And when you think about that, much more energy in consumption is used in the gas sector than in the power sector in Germany. And that Germany was, and neighbors, of course, were more than 50% dependent on Russian gas deliveries. It's like a great blackout in the power sector. You can compare that. So it was clear that immediately new sources of getting natural gas were needed, and the German government directly decided to come up with LNG terminals, and there was not one before. So that was end of 2022, and at the same time we decided to found a new company, Deutsche Energy Terminal GmbH, which is now existing for around 2.5 years, starting from nothing, no room, no notebook, no mobile phone. And today we are operating with 3 LNG terminals in Germany. The third one, we just started operations last week, and the fourth one is still under construction. So you can imagine you must be crazy to do such a job in such a short time, but I think it was necessary.
Jonathan, yeah.
That's for the moment, I think.
Okay, then we'll move over to you, Jonathan.
Yeah.
As the small-scale operator, amongst these other more complicated operations, but still very important part of the LNG value chain, what's important for you, and how will it look like the next 5 years, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably important to say where we were the past 5 years to where we are today to where we're going to be in the next 5 years. I mean, even today the market is in the small scale sector, which maybe not everyone is familiar with, is pretty unrecognizable from where it was in 2020. I think when we started, so we founded Avenir in 2017. We then launched it officially in 2018 with the support of 2 of my fellow panelists here from Golar and Hög and Stolt-Nielsen. And the principal strategy back then was we wanted to support the build-out of the small-scale market, and through that we wanted to invest in the maritime sector in it. So we were ordering ships, so we ordered 6 vessels on spec because we believed in the market. And back then we were thinking, okay, marine bunkering is going to form one part of it, power generation is going to form another, industrial consumption, road transportation. Where we are today is that 6 of our 7 vessels are now all operating in the LNG bunkering market. So we've been dragged along with the tide of the new build order book, which is widely accepted. LNG as their alternative fuel of choice, and our vessels fit into that market. So where we are is that, yeah, we have 5 vessels on the water today. We've got another 2 under construction. As of very recently, mostly all contracted out, and we support the oil majors and the traders who are actively building out their LNG portfolios, and to support the decarbonisation of shipping, which is important. It's important to note it is a transition step, But I think where we separate ourselves from a conventional ship owner is that we also happen to have our own LNG trading platform, which is one of the largest suppliers of LNG and bio-LNG in Northwest Europe, predominantly in the Baltic region. And that sector has been growing. But this, again, was founded out of necessity. And now it's become almost a standalone business. I mean, we delivered vessels in during COVID, during the gas crisis in 2022, when the US trying to sell LNG that was 10 times more expensive than alternative fuels. So it was a struggle, but now obviously the market has widely adopted it. Our vessels are busy. We're handling significant volumes. I think we've handled well in excess of 1 million tons over the fleet that's in operation today. So it may be small scale, but it has quite a significant reach, and I think it's a important conduit to extension to the conventional LNG market as we know today.
Thanks. I'll just go back to this value chain so it's clear for everyone. As a backdrop, before we move into the next topic, which we are going to look a bit more on the LNG value chain in a global perspective. So I would like to start with you, Erik. So what regions do you consider as important regions for developing of the floating infrastructure in the LNG chain? And how does this really tie up with the development of supply of LNG? I think we heard earlier that there's a big pipeline of LNG projects. How does that fit in with your ambitions in the company?
Yeah, so we heard earlier that the supply wave is coming. It's already started, actually. And LNG supply will grow from some 400 million tons to 600 and 700 over the next quite few years. So all of that volume has to be imported. And it's not going to happen in the old giants, Korea and Japan and Spain, where a lot of the volumes have been imported before. Most of those markets, or all of those markets, are going to be pretty flat. So the growth is going to be in China, which depend on large land-based terminals, so it's not so interesting for us. But most of this growth will happen in South Asia and Southeast East Asia. And what we're seeing is that for several countries, they are now moving from being net exporters of LNG or gas to net importers. That's happening in Indonesia and Malaysia, in Algeria, and also in Egypt, where we recently announced a contract. And that's a pretty interesting case, actually. They've been producing natural gas. They've been importing in via pipelines. And they're also having a contract with Croatia now, where they will start liquefying. Despite that, the demand is increasing a lot more, so they will depending on importing LNG, and they have plans for 4 FSRUs in just that market. So all of this is happening. So a lot of this will have to come into South Asia, Southeast Asia, which don't really have the importation infrastructure today, and FSRUs will be probably the most fitting assets for those markets that can do sort of reasonable or high regas capacities and storages for those markets. So we're looking at this very positively, and we also think South America is still a very interesting market where FSRUs are acting as backup for renewables, both wind, solar, and hydro. And also in Europe, even if the LNG growth is going to be limited, there will be need for more FSRUs to sort of for energy security reasons, and we see several projects developing. So, it's a very positive outlook from our perspective in terms of how the importation side of LNG need to be developed.
Okay, I would like to ask you, Carl Fredrik, as the operator of maybe the most complicated asset that requires the highest financing, what are really the competitive advantages of your assets? And if you compare it to land-based infrastructure, what are the economic benefits of having such an infrastructure on the water?
Okay, that's a long question, so we'll try to make it briefer. But to set some things into sort of perspective here. If you supply gas or produce gas, there are 3 cost drivers. It's the cost of gas, it's the cost of liquefying the gas, and it's the transport distance from wherever it's produced to wherever it's going to be consumed. The world's largest producer of LNG in the world today is America, the US. The market when we started this year was 430 million tons. 100 of that is supplied out of the US. For the next 5 years, the market is set to grow by 180 million tons, so a 40% increase. But 130 of that 180 is meant to come from the US. So the US will increase its market share from 23 to 37% of global LNG supply. Think about that. It's a massive increase. Now, what's the cost driver for the gas supply? Well, all of the American project is Henry Hub, which is the gas price in the US, plus 115%, which covers fuel consumption and pipeline fees, plus liquefaction tariffs. If you need this much more capacity, what's going to happen to Henry Hub? Do you think if you more than double volume, do you think it will go up or down? What do you think will happen to liquefaction fees when you have a massive cost inflationary pressure? They will go up. So the US are not only the largest producer today, they will continue to be even larger, and they're also the marginal producer in terms of cost, and the cost is going up. So what's the advantage of what we bring to the table? Well, we can source gas from alternative places than the US, where we can source gas significantly cheaper than Henry Hub. We construct our units at half the cost of US liquefaction. We don't necessarily want to charge half the fee because we want to make more money than the liquefaction plants in the US. And subject to where we are, we also have a shipping advantage in shipping distance.
I think you need to say that again. Yeah.
So anyway, I'll just speak louder. So you then also have a shipping advantage. So if you have an advantage on the cost of the gas, the cost of liquefaction, and shorter shipping distance, you have a business with 3 input drivers, you're cheaper on all 3, and you have to win. The other thing I also think is very interesting is, to your point, and the situation we've seen not only in Germany, but in Europe, led by Germany. Europe was single source Russia supply, that's what we're about. I happened to meet your vice chancellor a few years ago, and he said, Europe will never be single source ever again. And here we are, about to replace Russia with the US.
Could you try the microphone?
And then we can debate if we have a stable political environment out of the US. I don't think we need to debate it, but we can debate it. And then you can, do you want to be single source US or you want to find other supplies? The second largest shale gas discovery in the world is in Argentina. They're not exporting today. We will introduce them as a gas exporter with initially 6 million tons. We're exporting out of Mauritania, Senegal, and we're exporting out of Cameroon. This doesn't only benefit our buyers and us because it's cheaper value chain, cheaper gas to the world, but it significantly develops the countries we operate. We're the second largest GDP producer in the whole of Cameroon. So in addition to supplying the world with cheaper, more available gas, we're also enabling the economies where we operate. So that's the advantages.
And it offers a lot of flexibility, I hear.
Yes.
Yes. It's important with clear answers. Yeah. I would just like to ask you as well, Jonathan. How do you, FSRUs are large import terminals offering volumes to the grid, but how can then your company play a role in this infrastructure? What's really the benefits and how can it...
I think simply put, we extend the reach of the conventional market into new markets that don't necessarily appear on a lot of people's radars, whether they're small importing nations that require a small-scale facility, whether it's nations that are penned in by geographical reasons and they can't take large-scale infrastructure. We see ourselves, as I mentioned previously, as a conduit to the conventional market. And what that does is we're trying to start to truly commoditize the LNG space, because if you look at it, and one of the interesting points that I always raise when you're looking at especially the LNG fleet, and that's large scale and small scale, it's one of the only fleets out there that's completely inversed in size. So it's dominated by large scale vessels. I think there's going to be 1,200 large scale vessels on the water over the next few years. There are today about 60 small scale ships. So we are very much in the minority. But to enable the break bulk distribution, the re-export, the redistribution to new markets, you're requiring small-scale assets. And small-scale, when talking in the large arenas, obviously people don't necessarily understand that if you were to aggregate the demand, not just from the bunkering sector, but from the power generation, the industrial, the road transportation market, it's significant. And actually, I think over the next decade, we expect that 10% of all traded LNG in the world will be handled in small-scale assets. And that's in an extension from the FSRUs, from the land-based terminals, which we are actively re-exporting from. And we've heard about the tidal wave of LNG that's coming. That all needs to find new homes. And that can't all just go into the conventional production to consumption. What's going to happen, you'll have hubs, which you have redistribution places. You have the bunkering market, which is growing at extreme rates. I think what we're looking at for the past 12 months, 40% of all new build orders across the global fleet had elected LNG as their chosen marine fuel. So if you were to extrapolate that and take the total marine fuels market, which is roughly around 250 to 300 million tons, and say, okay, well, theoretically, we're on track to take 40% of that. If things carry on the way they are, then the demand and the volume requirements that are going to have to flow into the sector are immense. So it's got a fantastic potential. As I said, everything from an Avenir's perspective has now been lent towards the bunker market because that's the here and now. But we also believe that there's future small power generation, industrial demand that will also follow suit. So yeah, so what does a small scale role play? I think it's going to be, a great aggregator for the conventional market, and as I said, a way of finding new homes for this huge amounts of LNG that we're going to see coming in the next few years.
But huge amounts of LNG. I'm just curious. Will there be enough capacity, or is it possible to scale up quickly enough, depending on the amount?
Well, I think if you look at the small scale assets, I think most people now are looking and saying, okay, there is a big lag between how much is on the water today versus what we're needing. Even if you were to just look at the bunkering market itself, I think there's a talk of being a significant shortfall in LNG bunker vessels being on the water by the time which the majority coming from the container fleet get delivered over the next 3 years. And I think at the moment you have, as I mentioned, 60 small-scale vessels on the water. Actually, you could probably take 30 of those out to say they're not compliant to be able to provide LNG bunkering services today. They may require upgrades. So really, it's quite a large delta. So we've done a lot of modeling with partners and with customers about where the pinch points are going to be over the next few years. And yes, there's going to be lots of LNG. There's going to be lots of demand. But the missing piece is going to be the bunker vessels, which is why we're hugely excited about it. We want to continue to grow, we want to continue to order and maintain our market-leading position, because we know the market's going to be short ships unless someone takes a big stand, which we've done in the past.
Yeah, so the future looks bright.
I'd say so, yeah.
I just want to focus a bit on the shift we saw in the LNG market in Europe. So back to you, Eric. I think before the problems we faced with Russia and Ukraine, the LNG and especially FSRU market in Europe was a bit dry, I would say. But now this significant event changed the whole dynamics of the market. Could you talk a bit about that and the future, how you see it? Also, I'm thinking a bit about the FSRU. The FSRU's position in a political unstable market.
That's right. It was a huge shift back in 2022, and Peter talked a bit about it. So before the energy crisis, there were only 2 FSRUs in Europe. We were operating one in Lithuania, and there was one in Croatia. And the rest of the FSRUs, there's about 50 FSRUs on the water, where in South America and certain parts of Asia, who were really leading that part of the market. And then Russia invaded Ukraine, and Europe found itself without, Germany alone, 50 BCM of gas in 2022, and really needed solutions. I don't think many people had thought about FSRUs actually at that time, so it really came up when Habeck, as you met, came to Oslo, and we offered the solutions into Germany. And what was a bit mind-blowing is that within less than a year, we provided 3 LNG terminals into Germany, and before this they had no LNG infrastructure at all. I don't think anybody thought that was possible, and it could only be done in very close cooperation with the German state and government that actually introduced a new law to make this happen very quickly. We worked together with RWE, Uniper, Deutsche Regas, and a lot of partners. And it shows what is possible when you're really putting pressure on the system. So these were the first 3 LNG terminals, and until recently the only ones that had been operating in Germany. I think by now everybody understands sort of the fantastic assets that floating terminals are. They're very fast to market, but they're also very flexible. So during a contract or ownership, you can move them around and sort of flow with the demand. And also, we also estimate that they're about 50% less cost than land-based terminals. I think what Germany has not understood yet is that these are not just emergency solutions. They're actually very good long-term assets, and most countries use these for long-term contracts because of the flexibility, because they can be moved around, and because of their cost competitiveness, and you can upgrade technologies, etc. So we're still working on that in Europe. But I think the lessons for Europe really is you need diversification of energy, and LNG is a great way of providing diversification to a lot of countries around the world. And secondly, I think a lot of people have their eyes open now for the role of floating solutions in several parts of the LNG value chain.
And how important has this collaboration between you and Peter and your companies been in that respect? Maybe you would like to comment, Peter? And then also maybe a bit on the role of FSRUs for your part, and then also the natural gas as a security in Europe.
Yeah, so the job we are doing is on the one hand a classic business job, but minimum 51% of that is a political job, means bringing security of supply. So that's the reason why we are there. The market didn't bring it up, so the government decided, and we are a 100% governmental company. So of course you cannot do that alone. Therefore we have these professional partners like Höegh and like Energos and Accelerate, so I have to be fair to mention them also. And then behind another 20 partners who are doing a lot of good and important jobs. So that went well, and you can believe me, the first 2 years we were only thinking about making this alive. Collaboration means, on the one hand, we need, of course, the FSRU. On the other hand, we need to connect it with the grid. So there is the gas grid, and you need to install the suprastructure. And this morning I heard that usually the ship is faster developed than the projects. Yeah, the question is, what is a project? An FSRU connection, for example, is a project. And I think the big difference is, of course, constructing a ship is not easy, but you are in the shipyard, yes? and when you have a project where you develop a superstructure, you are outside, and you have all the things about challenges with construction. You have all the discussions with authorities, and you have all the discussions with NGOs in Europe. Yeah? That's not only Germany, that's all over. And you have to manage that. And in this case, you need all cooperation with all partners very quickly to solve all these issues. And for example, emission issues, and then you do some additional things on an FSRU, and this went really well. I have to say thank you very much for that, so that we could manage all that. Yeah, you want to hear something about the future?
Yes,
I think.
Absolutely. I think the future is super important.
This is
and I think the theme for Nor-Shipping is future-proof, so we can talk more about that.
The question is, on the one hand, the demand, and on the other hand, what is, in fact, the demand in form of the fuel. So that means currently European economy is, let me say, low, to be very diplomatic, yeah. But to be more honest, it's in a critical situation. But and we hear the real increase of business will be in Asia Pacific, but I'm not willing to give up now. Yeah. So, for example, in Germany, the demand is minimum 20% below historical imports, and it was always the case that it was around double the amount Germany takes. That means a lot of energy or gas was transferred to other countries. And coming back to economic strength means the demand will raise significantly. And we do not have the FSRU and terminal capacity currently to replace completely the demand we had before via Nord Stream pipeline, for example. So this is one thing we have to see when the economy is coming up, not all over Europe, and let's cross fingers that we get it. Let's be sportive to get it. Then the demand will start. Then we have learned that there is something we call climate change. And a lot of countries have now written in law that they want to become climate neutral. Latest at 2050, Germany 2045. So we are sticking to the laws, I think. So looking backwards means in Germany, for example, we have now 20 years to replace one thing with the other. And for me, it's an equation. You cannot just go down with LNG without ramping up the other thing. Yeah. So that means the more, for example, hydrogen-based derivatives like ammonia, the less LNG. The less ammonia or others, the more LNG. So we have to be very flexible. Means you do this or you do that, and that's what we are now preparing in thinking when we develop our sites. That we look what can we do to make transition possible. And on the other side, it's not only about our terminals, also about the land-based terminals, which are now planned so that we can be flexible, and this is what we are now carrying. Otherwise, we will see a lot of vessels making circles on the sea because there is no possibility to import that.
But it sounds like there's still a future for the LNG value chain in Europe, seen from your point of view.
Minimum to 2050, I would say, but less if the other commodities are growing. If not, the more. So nobody knows really, because all these hydrogen-based business cases are economically very challenging, and it's depending on the health of European economy, if it can be co-financed, for example, by the states, that this is ramping up. On the other hand, you see really big developments like hydrogen pipeline grids, which are developed all over Europe. You see big industrial players coming up with large-scale electrolyzers, so that's production domestic, but also looking in the direction of import and so on. There are initiatives to produce hydrogen somewhere in the world like H2 Global initiative from Germany, where you see tenders for import of hydrogen and so on. So we should not underestimate innovation, the power of innovation.
Yeah, I'm just thinking also that it's possible to coexist, especially for quite some time going ahead. Just want to check in with you as well, Carl Fredrik, on the FLNG and the complexity and the challenges you see, and maybe also how important is the political collaboration and willingness to get an FLNG up and running?
Yeah, so when we do export projects, it's a very, very large project. So you obviously need a charter counterpart that has the gas, but this will immediately get into a governmental process in the same way you guys faced for importation in Germany. It's just the same for exports. So when we go to, for example, Cameroon, we were the ones introducing them as LNG exporters. The same is true in Mauritania, Senegal. It's our ship that enables them to export gas, and the same is true for Argentina. So if you have a country that's not exporting, they don't have the export licenses, they don't have the environmental licenses, they don't have even the laws are not written. So you need to work together with the charter and the government to develop the framework necessary to do the exports. you can say that that's significant barriers for business, but once it's done once, you've opened the market, so then you can replicate it, obviously. When it comes to the technical aspects, our ships or floating infrastructure are just big and complicated. It costs around $2 billion to construct one of 3.5 million tons. To put things into scale, they're 380 meters long, they're 63 meters wide, and they're 120 meters tall. To put things further into perspective, we spent 38 million man-hours to construct the last one. So that's 17,500 working years. So to construct this, I think it's more than double the time it took to build the tallest building in the world, Burj Al something.
Yeah, sounds very complicated.
So it's complicated, but it can be done. Yeah. What we do is that we take technology that's applied on land for decades, and we put it into a maritime environment. The complication with that is that you have rotating equipment that needs to deal with waves, currents, winds, and salt water, and they don't like any of it. So there's an engineering feat to make that work on water.
But it still provides flexibility and an opportunity in the LNG value chain, I hear. Because the way you said it sounded very, very complicated and almost a bit unachievable. With that many
we've done it now
hours.
3 times. Hopefully, we're going to do more of it. So it's certainly doable, and we've had 100% operational uptime since we started in Cameroon. We've never had 1 minute of unscheduled downtime. That's better than any other ones who's tried to do the same. So it works.
Yeah. Eric, your company has taken bold steps into the hydrogen economy. I'm very curious to hear more. Maybe a bit your beliefs for the future in this market.
Yeah, first of all, I would say that LNG will be part of the energy mix for decades to come, also in Europe. I know you have to be a bit political correct in your answers, Peter, but it's going to be a source of energy for a long time in Europe. But I do think as well that even if the hydrogen hype is over, there will be a market also for hydrogen, and we see EU is taking steps with their strategy, and also Germany is now building 9,000 kilometers of hydrogen piping. So infrastructure is being built. The first part of that is being filled with hydrogen. We speak with off-takers, so there will be a market. Of course, the hydrogen price needs to come further down for this market to scale. But that means that there will also be need for infrastructure. We think it will be too expensive to produce hydrogen in Europe. So the most feasible way, or at least a large share of the hydrogen, needs to be imported. And the best way of doing that is to transport hydrogen as ammonia. So that's why we have taken steps. We're developing our cracker technology at the West Coast with Wärtsilä as our technology partner. Just as we did 20 years ago on the regas technology, we also work with Wärtsilä. And we're funded by Innovation Norway, and we have a lot of partners on that project. The unique thing about that technology is that it will be much more compact than current cracker technology, so you can fit it on a floating solution. We've got a project for that in Lubmin, just a few 100 meters away from the Nord Stream pipeline, which is hydrogen ready. So we think that will be the first project, potentially in 2027, that will be up and running. And then we have a larger scale project in southern France, in Port-la-Nouvelle, where we will have a full-scale hydrogen terminal with 3 crackers on board. We can deliver 210,000 tons of hydrogen per year into the grid in southern Europe, which will flow into southern Germany and other parts of the market. You know, that's happening. We're talking to yards about these solutions. So it's real tangible technology that we have at hand. And then the timing of this, you know, we will have to work on. So hydrogen, we will want part of it, but we're also seeing EU and even Germany now moving on CCS. So that's why we partnered up with Aker BP with their licenses. And we have a concept for the export terminal that can handle carbon. And really now we're working mostly commercially in different hubs in Northern Europe to start scaling the volumes for this. I think that the timing of this will again depend on the cost of carbon. I think when we see the ETS surpass $140 dollars per ton per kilo approximately. I mean, that's when this starts becoming more feasible. So we're quite excited about that, and this does not mean that we're moving out of LNG. On the contrary, we're growing that fleet, but we will move into then other energy vectors as we move forward as well.
Future-proofing.
I would say though that for LNG being developed in parallel, I thought there was some good perspectives in the previous session on decarbonizing the LNG value chain. That's something also we're working on, and our ambition is to basically put in place zero-emission LNG terminals. And the way to do that is to do two things. One is to connect with spill water from shore, like we have in Brunsbüttel in Germany. And the other is to connect to shore power, which we're also working on several places. And then you can basically run it as a zero-emission LNG terminal.
Very exciting. I would like to, I see time is running, so for Carl Fredrik and Jonathan, I would like to hear from you as well. How can really the LNG value chain play an important part in this decarbonization journey? It's a lot about hydrogen, and it's a bit a competition, but is it really, or how do you see it? Johnson, maybe you first.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk mainly to the maritime sector, which is what we're predominantly supporting. I think it's interesting to note that when you talk about the fuel mix going forward, we've gone through, well, the industry, or the shipbuilding industry has gone through a super cycle over the past few years where there's been a huge amount of orders placed for container vessels, car carriers, and a lot of other sectors. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of that has adopted LNG as an alternative fuel choice. Those ships aren't just going to be operating for 2-3 years, they're going to be operating on the water for 20 to 30 years. So there will be a role there for LNG going forward, and how it competes with a lot of other fuels. We're talking about ammonia here and hydrogen. Shipping has always bought the cheapest, most compliant fuel it can.
That's true.
And I think when it comes down to it, that there's going to be a bit of a land grab for hydrogen, for ammonia. I don't think shipping is going to be first in line. I think they will play a role in some short sea areas with ferries and things like that. But I think when you look at the merchant shipping fleet, you have to look at what's going to be competitive, and LNG is forecast to be competitive, supported by the production volumes we're seeing coming out. And then the real interesting element for us, what we see at Avenir, is the ability to say, okay, we're going to take this LNG dual fuel infrastructure that owners have invested billions of dollars in, and say, how is that going to be future-proofed? Well, that gets future-proofed by bio-LNG, biomethane, e-LNG going forward. Now, we see this being important because I speak to all the owners of the major container lines, and they say, okay, well, you've ordered these ships. What's your view? LNG? Yes, LNG is going to be the predominant, but it's about how you ratchet up the percentage of bio-LNG, because that's the way that you start decarbonizing successfully the maritime industry. We're very excited about this. We have our own marine bunkering division in Northwest Europe, and this year we're targeting 20% of the total sales that we'll make will be bio-LNG. And that is up from 0% last year. So there's a lot of players taking it in the voluntary space. There's a lot of people doing it for Fuel EU Maritime, of course. And we took the decision ourselves to say, okay, well, we're not just going to sell it, we'll walk the walk, talk the talk as well. So we elected to run this ship on the Avenir Ascension on bio-LNG for the course of for 2025 and most likely beyond. And what does that do? I mean, our consumption is fairly small in the grand schemes of things, but if you take our position, we save 3,500 tons of CO2 a year by burning bio-LNG. Now, that's equivalent to 2,000 diesel cars that we can replace on the roads, which is something. But then when you consider that we consume 1% of the volumes that we sell, then you realize the effect it can have if we start ratcheting up on bio compounds into and also synthetic LNG in the future. It has a meaningful impact on decarbonizing that sector.
Any problems getting hold of enough volumes?
That will be the problem. Yeah. That will be the problem. But I think if you look at the EU especially and certain other jurisdictions, they have a very good mass balancing economy now. So it was a case where, a few years back, people were talking about liquefying biomethane to get it into the transportation market. That doesn't necessarily make sense because you run a carbon cycle through it. So you're taking a step back.
Maybe we should have a new panel on that, actually.
Yeah.
On that topic. Carl Fredrik.
Yeah, I think the way I see it is that the global energy demand is increasing. LNG or natural gas is the cleanest burning fossil fuel on any measure. CO2, particles, SOx, NOx, and the rest of it. This is not about replacing LNG, it's about replacing coal and oil. If we can do that, I think this is, some people call it transition energy. Yes, it's transition, but there's no one who talks about how long transition is. And I think it's here, as Eric said, far beyond decades. This is going to be here for a very long time. The infrastructure is here. The fuel is abundant. There's much, much, much of it around the world. And it's cheaper and cleaner and more flexible than other fuels. One other observation, I think there are some very interesting speeches by my colleagues here, but I just realized that you're all private. So if you guys want some exposure to this, we're the only public company here. We're listed in New York.
We are also
public. We trade
public.
around 30 to 50 million.
We are public.
You said you're 100% owned by the state, no?
Yeah, by the federal state, yes.
Yeah, okay, public. So I can't buy stock in your company.
Okay, no.
Sorry. So if anyone likes this story and wants the exposure to LNG, GLNG is the ticker. It's on NASDAQ.
That's good. You're doing your job. Very good. Any last comments from Erik, Peter?
So I think we have to be fair and have to say LNG plays really important role today and also in the next time, however we think how long it will be. At the same time, we should not underestimate, as I said, innovation, because I think the most competitive society in the future will be the society with the best efficient energy infrastructure. And this is maybe based on other fuels. And the question is not to stick in the past, to be a modern, flexible company, to work with LNG today and to work with other fuels in the future. I think we have all the best potential for that. And for example, your company and also the other companies are already preparing it. So I think that's the way.
I think it's important that we all prepare, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening, taking the time to come here today and listen to this panel. The future looks bright for many, sounds like. And if you want to talk about ammonia, you can come to me afterwards. Thank you.